Sonny remained silent for a few moments, absorbing what Noctis had told him. The altar island was calm and tranquil, the lake surrounding it shimmering in the darkness with the reflected moonlight. The branches of the ancient tree swayed gently above his head.
Because she was worshipped.
He snorted and looked away, feeling bitterly disappointed for some reason. After a while, he said darkly,
So what? Is that all there is? The sun god was jealous?
The sorcerer glanced at him, a knowing and stern look on his face. He slowly shook his head.
No, he wasn't.
Noctis remained silent for a bit, then sighed.
The gods have never shown any animosity toward demons. In fact, their relationship was somewhat friendly. In the battles of ancient times, they even fought side by side as allies.
He frowned.
Neither had the gods cared about whom or what the mortals worshipped. There were all kinds of silly cults before. Some rulers would claim themselves divine. There were people who built temples to beasts and spirits. Some oddballs even worshipped rocks or corrupted abominations. By the moon, can you imagine? But the gods did not mind at all.
The sorcerer glanced up at the sky, thought for a bit, and then said somberly,
However, people had never worshipped a daemon before Hope. The daemons, you see, are elusive and solitary creatures by nature. There is the eldest, the mysterious Weaver, the demon of fate, who is shrouded in countless layers of lies. Then there is the youngest, Nether, the demon of destiny, who secluded himself in the darkness of the underworld. There is the demon of oblivion, whose name is long forgotten.
Sonny listened attentively, absorbing the new information. Already accustomed to wielding the emerald medallion, he reflexively let go of the beautiful stone and allowed it to hang from the chain wrapped around his fingers, so that his thoughts remained private.
So, the prince of the underworld was actually called Nether. I wonder which came first, the name or the title. And he was also the demon of destiny, it seems. Wait, aren't fate and destiny the same thing? I guess they're not. The rune for destiny can also mean choice, after all. So, was he actually the demon of choice?
His thoughts were interrupted by the sorcerer's wistful voice.
And the rest, each a personification of calamity and disaster, mysterious, distant, and terrifying, each and every one of them. Or at least they were until the demon of desire decided to come and live among us mortals, becoming known as Hope. She built her kingdom here, and soon people learned to love her, and not long after that, they started to worship her.
Noctis paused, and then continued, his face growing darker.
And that was when we learned that while the gods are friendly to daemons, and indifferent to mortals building temples to beasts and spirits and rocks, they would not allow a daemon to be worshipped. They were so unwilling, in fact, that the Lord of Light brought down his flames upon the mortal realm, obliterating a whole chunk of it.
Sonny frowned, feeling a cold sense of dread permeate his heart. Remembering one of his nightmares, he shivered.
But why?
The sorcerer looked at him with a bit of surprise and shrugged.
Who knows? I guess only the gods do. Well, and maybe a daemon or two. I doubt that even Hope knew what she had done wrong. But maybe she does now. In any case, after her imprisonment, slowly, the idea of worshipping a daemon became tantamount to heresy.
Noctis suddenly laughed.
What a strange word. Heresy. Don't you think? It had not even existed when I was young, you know. But then, suddenly each of the 6 cults started treating daemon worshippers as criminals, pests who were spreading a viral disease, and the concept of heresy was invented. Now, Becoming a heretic means being hunted down and saying goodbye to your life?
He grew silent and then sighed.
We did not know it at the time, of course, but the destruction of the Kingdom of Hope was a turning point in history. With it, the Age of Heroes ended, and the current one, whatever it will be called one day, began. Ah, what a dreadful era. Nothing has gone right from then on.
Sonny remained silent for a while, thinking that there was something strange about this whole story. Nothing made sense. The gods and the daemons had been allies once. Knowing that they would eventually clash in a devastating war, he could not quite believe it. However, on second thought, the prince of the underworld, Nether, was indeed described as having been close with the goddess of the black skies once. Who was to say that the other daemons had not consorted with the gods as well? But that only made the divine punishment that the Lord of Light had brought down upon the Kingdom of Hope more inexplicable and strange. And who had they been allied together against? The creatures of the void? What was the exact timeline of all this convoluted nonsense? The Age of Heroes had ended with the imprisonment of Hope. But when had it started? And what had been happening before? Sonny's mind was whirling with thoughts of the past, present, and future, and his head spun trying to keep track of his own role in and out of time.
Damn, so many questions.
Sonny glanced at Noctis, hesitated for a few moments, and then grasped the emerald amulet again. However, the sorcerer was having none of it. He glanced at Sonny and said with a smile,
I feel like you are about to ask me a question. That would be the second question. Wait. No, the second question was whether or not the sun god was jealous. Wicked demon. You tricked me.
Noctis shook his head, looked at Sonny with reproach, and stood up.
Shame on you, Sunless. Good night. Tell your friends to prepare well in the time that we have left.
With that, the sorcerer gave him another hurt look, then turned away and started walking back toward his residence. After a few steps, however, he stopped and said, in his usual carefree manner,
Oh yes, I almost forgot. You will have to go and retrieve the third knife too. Don't worry, though. It is not going to be hard. Rather easy, really.
Sonny, who was staring at the tranquil lake with a dark expression, simply nodded.
Sure. Wait, what? Why do we have to do it? Go and get it yourself.
Noctis hesitated for a bit, then sighed.
I wish that I could, but, well, I might have said some nonsense about how my friend should only give the knife to someone of pure thought and heart, or something like that. And sadly, while I am the most outstanding person in all of the Kingdom of Hope in many regards, purity is not my strong suit. You and your friends, however, you reek of purity. Well, one or two of you do at least. For now.
With that, the sorcerer winked at Sonny and strolled away, whistling a jovial tune. Sonny watched him go, and then shook his head with a bewildered expression on his face.
Wait, did he just swindle me into getting another knife for him? Again?
He blinked a couple of times and clenched his 4 fists.
Damnation!
After their conversation under that full moon, Noctis had secluded himself in his residence for a couple of weeks. Sonny tried to talk with the eccentric sorcerer a few times, but the silent sailor dolls refused to open the door and just stared at him with their crude wooden faces. There was, of course, the option of simply using Shadow Step to get inside, but somehow Sonny suspected that intruding upon the immortal transcendent would not have been the best idea. There were real souls trapped inside these sailor dolls, after all. In the end, he and the other members of the cohort had no choice but to follow the advice Noctis gave him, to rest and prepare for what was to come. Luckily, there were a lot of preparations they had to do. While all four had trained themselves extensively before entering the nightmare, many things happened since then. There were a lot of lessons they had learned in these 3 terrible months, most of them bringing the four awakened to the very door of death. Now that they had time, they could go over everything they had learned, revisit it, and truly absorb it into their bones, connecting the new knowledge and skills to their foundation in a solid manner. For Sunny, this meant several things. The first one was Shadow Dance. He had found himself in a strange situation, having made the recent breakthrough inside of a nightmare that he did not really remember. Sunny could guess that mastering the 3rd step of his battle style was tied to the fact that he had lived through countless nightmares and lost himself in them, becoming truly shapeless and formless, forgetting himself and turning into other people completely. That observation was in line with how he had initially made progress to the 3rd step of Shadow Step, back in the arena of the Red Colosseum, where he shadowed numerous nightmare creatures. Back then, he had almost lost himself as well, but stopped at the last moment, fearing that he would not be able to come back. Being trapped in the nightmares had made that frightening step for him, and so he had approached the very edge of a breakthrough. The final piece of the puzzle had been trying to shadow the epitome of formlessness. Another shadow. Another nightmare. As a result of the breakthrough, Sunny's ability to recognize and gain insight into patterns of combat techniques had increased even more, now allowing him to understand and predict not only the movements and behavior of his enemies, but also intricately sense the flow of essence through their bodies, as well as, almost, but not quite, being able to predict their very thoughts. However, there was one glaring flaw in this miraculous ability, one that he didn't know how to solve. For the first time since Sunny had created Shadow Dance, the elusive battle art was starting to seem dangerous. Not only for his enemies, but also for himself. What was the point of being able to kill something if he ran the risk of losing himself and becoming that thing forever? To kill a dragon, one had to become a dragon. Why would anyone want to achieve such a victory if earning it meant ceasing to be themselves and becoming the very thing they had wanted to destroy? For now, he didn't have a solution, and that made him more than a little bit nervous. So Sunny decided to temporarily concentrate on other things. He spent a large part of his days practicing archery with Kai. Sunny quickly realized that he would never be as talented of an archer as his friend, but that did not mean that he could not achieve great results. In fact, his aim and skill with the bow were increasing at a steady pace. Still, there was a question of distributing the tools the cohort possessed in the most efficient manner, so Sunny reluctantly tried to lend Morgan's warbow to Kai. It was for naught, though. Because of the unbending enchantment of the bow, his friend was simply not strong enough to draw it. When their training sessions were over, Sunny would usually return to his room and spend the rest of the day fruitlessly practicing weaving. He had achieved some progress in his attempt to learn how to copy enchantments, but not enough to make the altered weave stable. The number of memories he had won in the Red Colosseum was dwindling by the day, with no apparent result, which made Sunny increasingly frustrated. It seemed that he had hit a bottleneck in his understanding of how spell weaves were supposed to work and was in need of a mental breakthrough to push himself any further. That breakthrough was not in a hurry to come, though. When the day was over and darkness encroached upon the world, Sunny turned to the 3rd and most time-consuming part of his preparations, collecting shadow fragments to form his 4th core. Leaving the sanctuary, he would travel to nearby islands in search of nightmare creatures to hunt, and kill those he could find that were not beyond his ability to defeat. By now, less than 150 fragments separated him from becoming a devil. The number seemed so small, but at the same time, was more troublesome than it should have been. The problem was in the fact that there were not as many nightmare creatures in the Kingdom of Hope as there had been on the Chained Isles in the future, especially not that close to the stronghold of one of the Chain Lords. As a result, his progress was torturously slow and tedious. To accelerate it somehow, Sonny had made a frightening decision to leave the surface of the islands and take his hunting to their underside, where the true horrors of this land dwelled. Luckily, his new body was somewhat fit to do so. With his sharp claws and talons, he was able to climb any surface, no matter how steep, or even remain mobile while hanging entirely upside down. And if he made a mistake, the heavenly burden was always at hand. In combination with his swiftly improving archery skill and determination to form a new core before the culmination of the nightmare arrived, Sonny was able to slay many dwellers of the dark side. There were indeed terrible and morbid creatures, and more than a few left scars on his body. But it was still not fast enough. By the end of the first 2 weeks, he was still not even halfway to his goal. And on that day, quietly and without any fanfare, something else happened. Somewhere out there, in the wild reaches of the Dream Realm, the changing star of the Immortal Flame Clan had finally become a tyrant. Sonny was in his room, watching as a memory disintegrated into a whirlwind of shimmering sparks, a dark expression on his face. He didn't need the spell to inform him that he had just lost another one, and yet the ever-helpful spell still whispered into his ear,
"Your memory has been destroyed."
Sonny snarled, then shook his head bitterly and summoned the runes. Intending to check on how many expendable memories he still had left, it was then that he decided to check on Neff's progress, which had long ago become a deeply ingrained habit of his. Seeing the changing star was still alive and fighting brought him both relief and grim motivation. Already sensing what he was about to see, Sonny stared at the runes and read,
Name, Nephis. True name, Changing Star. Rank, Dormant. Class, Tyrant. Soul cores, 5 out of 7. Soul shards, 0 out of 5,000.
He looked at the runes for some time, then sighed and dismissed them. Just a few days ago, she was still far away from reaching the 5th core. After the Red Colosseum and his battle with Nightmare, the gap between them had shortened even more. But now, Nephis had gone and done something crazy again, making it grow vast and infuriating once more. He stared at the walls of his room darkly. It was as though the two of them were constantly playing an insane game of tug-of-war, fully knowing that one wrong move meant death, but equally unwilling to let the opponent win. And from the very start of it, he had never been in the lead.
How tiresome.
Sonny shook his head, realizing that he was in no mood to blindly throw himself at the impregnable barrier of weaving anymore. At least, not today. His solemn mood changed, however, when the shadows he had stationed across from the sorcerer's door saw it open, and the familiar figure walked out, then winced at the bright sun. Noctis looked a bit disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes and slightly messy hair. Considering who it was, though, Sonny could only guess whether the immortal was tired or just hungover. Still, this wasn't a chance he was ready to miss. Wasting some essence to step through the shadows, Sonny appeared a few meters away from Noctis and looked at him with a guarded expression. The sorcerer blinked a couple of times, then put on a friendly smile.
Sunless, you are still here. Haven't we just talked?
Sunny inwardly rolled his eyes.
That was 2 weeks ago. 15 days, technically.
Noctis raised an eyebrow, shifted from foot to foot awkwardly, and then cleared his throat.
Oh, really? Well, what a nice day. Can I help you with something then?
Sunny stared at the sorcerer for a few moments, then nodded.
Yes. Yes, in fact you can.
The immortal transcendent smiled brightly.
Well, why didn't you say so? We are friends, are we not? And friends are supposed to help each other. So, what do you need?
Sunny gripped the emerald amulet tighter, hesitated for a second, and then said,
Can you teach me sorcery?
Noctis continued to smile for a bit, then laughed.
That's it? Sure, no problem. I am the greatest sorcerer in the Kingdom of Hope, after all. Under my guidance, you will become a distinguished sorcerer yourself in no time. Let me think. If we start right now...
As Sunny smiled tentatively, he looked at the sky to gauge the time of day, thought for a bit, and then added,
We'll be finished about the same time, 100 years from now. Let us start.
Sunny blinked.
What? 100 years?
The sorcerer frowned a little, then shrugged.
Well, maybe 200 years. That was how long it took me to learn the basics. If you mean true sorcery, of course, not those pitiful tricks others consider to be miracles. Actually, what do you think sorcery is?
Sunny hesitated, then said with uncertainty,
The ability to manipulate magical energies through means that fall outside one's aspect.
Noctis stared at him for a bit, then sighed.
A good enough answer. But no. Simply put, there is no such thing as sorcery. Or rather, there is no single thing called sorcery. But there are various ways to twist the underlying laws of the world to produce some effect, desirable or not. What we call sorcery is just a structured method of achieving a predictable result while doing so, with whatever means you possess, usually with the help of soul essence.
He looked around, observing the landscape of the sanctuary, and added,
Take me, for example. My aspect has to do with souls, and so I was able to learn a few things from the followers of Heart God, the god of souls, as well as emotions, memory, hunger, and growth. However, I only became a true sorcerer after learning Hope's magic.
Sunny tilted his head a little.
Hope's magic?
Noctis added,
Yes. The most common type of sorcery used by mortals, blindly and without a true understanding of its nature, I might add, comes from Hope. She is the one who invented writing, after all, and gifted it to us humans. What a wonderful invention it was. Writing itself does not produce sorcery, though.
He hesitated, and then added,
Before Hope invented writing, the most common type of sorcery used by mortals, even more blindly, was the sorcery of names. You see, Sunless, everything that exists has a name. In fact, you might even say that a thing only starts to exist after it is given a name. A flower is just a flower, one among many, until you call it a rose. Then, roses are suddenly different from all the other flowers, and so they come to exist.
Sunny frowned, not sure that he understood what the hell Noctis was talking about. Wouldn't roses exist even if they were not called roses? Well, in a sense, they wouldn't. Flowers that looked like roses would, but they would not be called roses, and so there would not be roses.
How confusing,
he thought. The sorcerer, meanwhile, ignored his befuddled expression and continued.
However, not all names are equal. Some are simply given and aren't worth much, while others have to be earned. And those names, the true names of things, hold power over them. Names are a powerful thing, Sunless, and so, a long time ago, people who learned those names could share in that power. However, their authority was obscure and fleeting, since it was only invoked when someone said the names aloud, and saying them with a mortal mouth was not an easy feat.
Sunny smiled.
But that was what made Hope's invention so ingenious, you see. Once writing appeared, one with enough knowledge could connect the names to material objects, granting the invocation permanence. Of course, it is not that simple. In fact, knowing the names of things and how to shape them into songs and phrases is incredibly hard, because with the knowledge of names comes the knowledge of everything.
Noctis let out a heavy sigh.
Simply scribbling a rune without understanding its meaning would not do anything, so it takes centuries to learn the very basics of runic sorcery, unless you are intrinsically predisposed to it, of course, which no one is, except for Hope herself. But I will gladly teach you everything I know, if you have a century or two to spare, I mean.
The sorcerer smiled brightly and stared at Sunny, sincerity written all over his obnoxiously beautiful face.
That slimy bastard.
Of course, Sunny did not have a couple of centuries to spare. But maybe he didn't need to.
Names are a powerful thing.
Suddenly, a seed of an idea appeared in his mind.
Maybe some other time.
Noctis sighed with regret and opened his mouth to say something, but the four-armed demon was already gone, swallowed by shadows. The sorcerer stared at the shadows with a sour face, then shook his head and sighed again.
What a strange fellow.
Back in the Red Colosseum, Sunny had spent an excruciating amount of time remembering and comparing the weaves of different memories in order to understand what they had in common. In his mind, there were 3 traits that all memories shared: the ability to be summoned and dismissed, the ability to repair themselves while dismissed, and the connection to the wielder's soul. By recognizing these 3 universal parts of the weave patterns, he thought that he had learned how to reproduce the simplest enchantments, at least to the point where he managed to create a simple pattern that allowed an item to be dismissed and summoned from essence. However, there was a 4th quality that all memories shared, one that he had not thought about. All memories had a name.
I am an idiot. Such an idiot.
He thought, chastising himself. He of all people should have known what power names wielded, considering that his own true name was literally the key to having absolute control over him. Appearing from the shadows that nestled in his room, Sunny fell on the bed and summoned the silver bell, the memory with which he was familiar the most. He had spent countless hours studying its weave and trying to comprehend the secrets of how it worked, to little avail up until now. Staring beneath the surface of the small bell, he saw the beautiful and complicated pattern of ethereal strings that permeated it, with a single dimly glowing ember in its middle. By now, Sunny had managed to recognize the parts of the weave that were responsible for all its unique qualities. Or so he thought. There were the 3 segments of the pattern that he had learned in the Red Colosseum, and the rest was the single enchantment of the bell. However, despite knowing all the parts, Sunny could never make sense of the whole weave, as though something was missing, making all his attempts to comprehend the logic and connections of the ethereal strings useless.
There is one more element. The silver bell does have only a single enchantment, but it also has a name. The name that differentiates it from every other memory and thus allows it to exist. Somehow.
Sunny stared at the part of the weave that he had thought was representing the enchantment for a long time, then summoned another memory and studied it as well. The task of separating one completely unique part of the weave from another completely unique part seemed impossible at first. After all, he had nothing to use as a reference. But he had something even better. The intrinsic predisposition to weaving that he had inherited from the demon of fate. The very quality that Noctis had mentioned Hope possessed when it came to runic sorcery as its creator. Sunny, of course, was no weaver, but he was able to intuitively sense the purpose of spellweave elements due to his connection to the enigmatic daemon. That talent was literally in his blood. All Sunny had to do now was carefully examine each and every string comprising the vast pattern and sense which ones were meant to create sound and which ones had no purpose he knew of. The ones he knew nothing about had to have something to do with the name. Hours passed, and soon it grew dark outside. Sunny continued to stare at the small silver bell, forgetting about his nightly hunt, and at some point in the middle of the night, his eyes suddenly widened.
There. Is it? Yes, I see it.
Finally, he had managed to isolate the part of the weave that had nothing to do with the three universal enchantments, but also didn't seem to be connected to the actual purpose of the bell, producing a ringing that could be heard from miles away. This had to be the part of the spellweave that described the name of the memory. Such a vast and intricate pattern of ethereal strings, all to express two simple words: Silver Bell. As soon as Sunny mentally connected these two words with the pattern, a strange thing happened. The weave of the silver bell remained the same, but he suddenly saw it differently. It was as though the whole thing completely transformed in front of his eyes while not changing at all. The disparate parts suddenly seemed harmoniously connected, and the chaotic and senseless structure of the weave suddenly appeared to possess a strange and mysterious, but elegant and undeniable logic. He was stunned.
How did I not see this?
The pattern was suddenly so much more open to him, so much easier to discern, and in the middle of it, weaving through every part of the tapestry of ethereal strings, was the name, Silver Bell, which served as the bridge and the unifying element between them.
No wonder every memory I tried to modify collapsed. I only missed the most important thing. Damn.
Sunny studied the weave of the silver bell with wide eyes, seeing the familiar parts of it in a new light. Then, however, a slight frown appeared on his face.
Wait, what is that?
Now that he saw the entirety of the logic behind the pattern, or rather, of the logic behind its foundational structure, he could also see an element that seemed alien to his understanding. By now, no part of this weave was supposed to remain unknown to him. And yet, there was one. More than that part of the weave was vast and terribly complicated, as much inherent to the whole structure of the memory as its name. It was hard to notice at first, but if one knew what to look for, it was almost impossible to ignore.
It's very pretty. But what the hell is it?
He scowled, then glanced at the other memory, wishing to compare its weave to that of the silver bell. To Sunny's surprise, the vast and beautiful underlying pattern was there as well, its presence as strange and unexplainable as before. Suddenly tense, he summoned all of his memories one after another, studying them and finding the mysterious pattern everywhere.
What the hell is it?
Sunny had no idea, and even his intuition was silent, not providing any hint as to the purpose of the ever-present hidden weave. The only clue he found was that a part of it bore a distant resemblance to the weave of the Midnight Shard. and that its overall structure slightly resembled that of the name of the silver bell. However, the mysterious pattern was incomparably vaster and deeper. He scowled and then suddenly tilted his head with a surprised expression.
Moonlight. Light.
Sonny glanced at the weave again and then froze.
Lost from light.
When morning came, Sonny was sitting on the floor with a wild look on his bestial face, his black, coarse hair in a mess. There was a glowing golden needle in one of his hands and a small silver bell in the other. The other two held a flute that seemed to be either cut from jade or made out of polished emerald bone. That was probably the best memory he had received in the Red Colosseum, but right now, Sonny couldn't care about the flute any less. Instead, all his attention was concentrated on the small bell. Holding his breath, Sonny raised and shook it. However, instead of the clear ringing that would be heard from kilometers away, all he heard was a barely audible, melodious whisper. A wild grin slowly appeared on his face, illuminating his features.
I've done it. I really did.
Barely containing his excitement, Sonny summoned the runes and read the description of the bell.
Memory, silver bell. Memory rank, dormant. Memory tier, 2. Memory description, a small memento of a long-lost home, which once brought its owner comfort and joy. Its clear ringing can be heard from miles away. Memory enchantments, silver song, sonorous. Silver song enchantment description. The ringing of this bell is not overly loud, but can be heard across a vast distance. Sonorous enchantment description. The owner can decide how loud this bell will ring.
Sonny's eyes glistened with joy. Of course, these two enchantments were not that powerful. However, that did not matter. What mattered was the fact that there were now two of them, despite that there had only been one before. He finally managed to successfully copy and transplant an enchantment, albeit a simple one. He had studied the emerald bone flute, painstakingly recreated the weave of the sonorous enchantment, and integrated it into the weave of the silver bell, without destroying it. He had done it. He had added a new enchantment to a memory. Failing to wipe the wide grin from his face, Sonny looked beneath the surface of the small bell. Now, its spell weave looked very different. Where there had once only been strings of ethereal light, now there were black strings, made of shadows as well. The two types of strings were intricately intertwined to create a complicated and yet harmonious pattern. More than that, the pattern of the silver bell used to have only one glowing ember that served as a nexus for the ethereal threads, but now there were two. Knowing that an additional enchantment would require a more powerful foundation, Sonny had used one of the soul shards in his possession to create a new anchor. All of this had only been possible because of his new insight into the structure of weaves, knowing that the name of a memory was integral to its spell weave, allowed Sonny to see the pattern as a whole, and so he was finally able to change it without destroying the thing entirely. Of course, he was still unable to even think about creating an enchantment of his own, but taking an already existing enchantment pattern and transplanting it into a different memory was not outside of the realm of possibility for him anymore. Granted, it was not an easy process. Just the simple sonorous enchantment took a whole night and an ocean of shadow essence to create. And that was after he had spent months staring at the silver bell and studying its spell weave. But still,
Gods,
he thought, he had done it. The possibilities were almost infinite. The ability to modify and change his memories could open countless doors for him in time. And that was only scratching the surface of his recent breakthrough. Just the fact that he had been able to raise the tier of the Silver Bell by adding an additional anchor was already promising enough. Yes, it would take a lot of time and effort to solidify this success and learn how to copy enchantments faster and more reliably. There would be plenty of failures along the way, but the more Sunny practiced, the more he would come to know about the logic and essence of weaving. One day in the future, he would gain enough knowledge and experience to take the next step and learn how to modify and change the enchantments themselves, altering their function. And one day after that, far in the future, he just might learn enough to try creating an enchantment and a memory of his own. On the day he succeeded in that daunting endeavor, on that day, Sunny would earn the right to call himself a true sorcerer. On that day, he would become a weaver. Much later, Sunny emerged from his room, stared at the bright sun with a dissatisfied expression, yawned, and walked toward the spot where he and Kai usually practiced archery. His friend was already there, wearing his charred wooden mask. There was a bow in his hands and a quiver of arrows by his feet. Noticing the four-armed demon, Kai turned his head and waved, greeting him.
Good morning.
Sunny rubbed his face, then revealed his sharp fangs in a frightening smile.
What's good about it? Doesn't matter. Shall we start?
The young man looked at him for a bit, then shrugged.
Sure, but where have you been these last few days?
Sunny blinked a couple of times.
In my room. Wait, a few days passed? I must have lost track of time.
Kai tilted his head, then suddenly glanced at Sunny's hands.
Oh, wait. Where is that emerald amulet Noctis gave you?
Sunny glanced down with a guilty look, lingered for a bit, and answered reluctantly.
Oh, that thing. I sort of broke it.
The young man's eyes widened.
You broke? Wait, then how am I hearing you?
At that moment, Sunny grinned and produced a simple-looking rock from the folds of his black kimono, then proudly presented it to Kai. The archer stared at it with confusion.
It is the ordinary rock?
Continuing to grin, Sunny shook his head. Then, the rock suddenly spoke in his voice.
It was, but now it is the extraordinary rock. I improved it, I guess. Now it can do the same thing as the amulet, but as an active enchantment, so no more blurting out random thoughts for me. What a relief. I can curse out anyone I want in peace again. Can have some mental privacy again. It can also be really, really loud, so its name changed as well.
Kai stared at him in bewilderment for a bit, then shook his head.
Well, this is great, but sadly we don't have time to discuss it in detail, or practice archery for that matter.
Sunny raised an eyebrow.
Really? Why?
The young man sighed, then stood up and picked up his quiver.
It's Noctis. He wants to see us.
Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then sighed and followed Kai through the garden. He felt a little uneasy about meeting Noctis.
Surely he wouldn't be mad at me for breaking his amulet. Well, who cares anyway? That slick bastard owes me too much already.
Destroying the Emerald Amulet had not been his plan. Sunny just really wanted to find a more efficient method of expressing himself. and the sorcerer's gift was the only thing in his possession that had a suitable enchantment. The problem was that the enchantment was made with runes and not spellweave, so Sonny had no way to reproduce it. He could, however, try to turn the amulet into a memory. Sonny had already achieved something similar back in the Red Colosseum by weaving a basic enchantment of summoning into his slave collar. However, the process had never been completed because the enchantment was destroyed in the clash with the collar's own magic, lasting only long enough to allow him to escape the cage. Now, however, Sonny had plenty of time to make another attempt. This time, armed with his new knowledge, he had a far better chance of success. Of course, it was not guaranteed, so he started by experimenting with a beautifully crafted wooden chair in his room. Slowly and tediously, he created countless strings of the essence and weaved the 3 basic enchantments into the piece of furniture, only to see them, and the soul shard he had used as an anchor, disintegrate into a rain of ethereal sparks. After thinking for a while and replenishing his essence, Sonny repeated the process, but this time with one additional step. He also weaved his true name into the pattern, using it as the beacon for the enchantment that was responsible for connecting the memory to the owner's soul. And so, the chair became a memory of sorts. Now, there was a blank space with a question mark in the list of memories he owned, with a description that stated,
This chair was turned into a memory by Lost from Light for reasons unknown.
The chair could be summoned and dismissed at will, and even repaired itself while stored within his soul. It could also be fed to Saint, increasing her shadow fragment count by 0.5 point, since the single soul shard Sonny had used to create the weave was of the awakened rank. Satisfied with that, Sonny waited for his cores to regenerate enough essence and repeated the process again, now with the Emerald Amulet itself. Sadly, the result was not the same. He did manage to make the amulet into a memory. What was more, in the process, the spell itself transformed the enchantment of the amulet from runic to a weave, showing just how ingenious Weaver's creation was. However, the resulting pattern turned out to be unstable, perhaps because of the alien nature of the amulet's magic, or perhaps because Sonny did not know its name, or how to name it using strings. It began to slowly unravel almost immediately after the transformation. All Sonny could do was feverishly study the weave of the swiftly decaying memory before it completely fell apart. So, the amulet destroyed itself. But Sonny still managed to copy its enchantment onto the ordinary rock, as well as adding a new anchor to the weave of the rock, thus elevating it to the 2nd tier. He also went ahead and copied the sonorous enchantment onto it as well. When he did, the name of the memory changed, and the ordinary rock became the extraordinary rock. Overall, Sonny was pleased with himself, not only because he managed to recreate another enchantment and confirm his ability to turn soul shards into food for his shadows, but also because he would finally be able to speak his mind, without speaking everything that was on his mind in the process. Gods knew he needed that. The only bad thing about the whole situation was that Noctis's gift was destroyed, but with some luck, the sorcerer would not even notice. Hopefully.
Whatever,
Sonny thought, happy to have his thoughts to himself. They met Effie near the wooden door. By now, the little girl's bruises had healed, and she looked like a vigorous, healthy child again. She was also gnawing on a large bone with a wild look on her face, seemingly making even the sailor dolls a bit nervous. Noticing the two of them, Effie smiled.
There you are.
Kai greeted her, and then asked,
Where's Cassia?
The little girl swung her bone, pointing at the flying ship that hovered above the sanctuary.
There. Noctis is too. Let's go?
With that, she swallowed the remains of the bone and raised her hands as if asking for a hug. Kai sighed, then picked her up and flew into the sky. Sunny grimaced, summoned the heavenly burden, and followed. Soon, they landed on the deck of the ship and found Cassia there, already waiting for them. The sorcerer was some distance away, watering the sacred tree. The sight of him with a watering pot in hand was so mundane that it almost looked comical. The members of the cohort approached Noctis and then stopped, waiting respectfully for him to notice them. After a while, Sunny cleared his throat, but that didn't faze the sorcerer. Then Sunny growled loudly. Finally, the sorcerer flinched, then turned around and smiled. "Oh, you're finally here." Sunny nodded, then asked cautiously,
We are. What did you want to talk about?
Noctis scratched his chin, then sighed. "Well, it's time for the four of you to go and retrieve the ruby knife. It's not too far from here, being kept by a friend. The whole trip should not take you more than a couple of days."
Sounds like another disaster.
Sunny thought, but he kept that to himself for now. Sunny frowned.
And what exactly do we need to do to get the knife from your friend?
Noctis blinked a couple of times, a confused look on his face. "Oh, nothing. Just go there and tell her to give you the knife. As long as at least one of you is pure in heart and thought, she will."
Can't be that easy. And what does being pure even mean?
Sunny wondered. Sunny wanted to ask a few questions, but then changed his mind. Speaking with Noctis more than absolutely necessary was troublesome. It was also fruitless, since Noctis only ever revealed as much information as he wanted, and never more than that. So he simply asked,
And where does this friend of yours reside?
The immortal transcendent smiled, then conjured a map of the Kingdom of Hope from somewhere, and pointed to a particular island. "Here. See? It's really close." Sunny looked at where the sorcerer's manicure finger pointed, and paled. He knew that island pretty well. It was the island of the tranquil, clear lake that he had been advised to never approach, because the creature living in the lake was so terrifying that even Skytide did not dare to venture there. The creature was surely corrupted, and as for its rank, no one even had a guess. Rattled, he glanced at Noctis with a dark expression and growled,
Are you joking? There's a terrible, unsightly thing living in that lake.
The sorcerer looked at him with reproach, and then said bitterly, "Well, that unsightly thing is my friend. Shame on you, Sunless. Of all the creatures in the world, I thought that you would be the last one to judge someone on their appearance. After all, you are a terrible and unsightly thing yourself, and yet we are best friends." Sunny stared at the sorcerer for a few moments, unamused. He really wanted to retort, but couldn't. The four-armed demon was indeed a fearsome and unsightly creature, as far as humans were concerned. So denying it would have been a lie. And while the extraordinary rock could repeat his thoughts, the thoughts it spoke aloud still had to be truthful. With an irritated snarl, Sunny looked away and said,
Fine. We will retrieve the ruby knife from your friend who lives in the lake. However, it would only be polite for you to return the favor and give us something in return, don't you think? To avoid putting a strain on our own friendship, you know.
These were more or less the exact words Noctis had used to lure him into a confrontation with Nightmare. So, Sunny was pretty sure that the sorcerer would not be able to refuse his request, Indeed, the immortal looked at him with a pale smile, and then let out a slightly nervous laugh. Oh, yes. You are right, of course. Is there something particular you had in mind? Sonny nodded.
As a matter of fact, I do.
With that, he pulled an amulet in the form of an anvil from the folds of his kimono and handed it to Noctis. This was the charm Master Welty had worn in the Night Temple to protect herself from Mordred. After her death, the small talisman remained in his possession, revealing that it was not a memory, but an actual object. Considering its shape and the fame of the great clan Valor, especially when it came to forging weapons and tools, it was not hard to imagine how the charm came to be. However, that did not mean that Sonny understood how it worked, and he really needed to. Cassia was immune to Mordred's possession due to her blindness, and Sonny himself was protected by the army of shadows contained within his soul. Kai and Effie, however, when he imagined his friends meeting the Prince of Nothing, his blood turned cold.
I want you to make something similar to this.
Noctis took the talisman and studied it with a curious smile. Slowly, however, the smile disappeared from his face. His gray eyes glinted with a strange emotion, and he said in a neutral tone, "Where did you get this?" Sonny shrugged.
Off an enemy's corpse? Well, more or less. Why?
The sorcerer studied the small anvil for a moment and shook his head with a sigh. I can't recreate this talisman. The sorcery used to enchant it is not something I've ever seen before. More than that, it was made for a reason that eludes me, and by someone far more powerful than I am. Which is a real feat, mind you, considering how mighty and talented I am. In any case, I can't do it. Think of something else. Noctis glanced at the anvil amulet with a frown, and then returned it to Sonny.
Someone far more powerful?
Sonny blinked a couple of times. Had Mordred's father created the talisman to ward off his son personally? That was entirely possible. Just how dreadful were the sovereigns to impress even an immortal saint of the bygone era? Sonny lingered for a bit, then hid the little anvil and sighed.
All right then, I'll think of something else. We will discuss it after the ruby knife is in our hands.
Noctis waved a hand and turned back to the sacred tree, then continued to water it. Fine. Just don't let your imagination run too wild. I am but a humble sorcerer, you know, not an actual deity. I only look like one. Ah, yes, my heavenly beauty is indeed divine. Sonny sighed, then gestured to the other members of the cohort and turned around. It was time to visit another of the humble sorcerer's friends. 4 awakened were walking across the great chain that swayed lightly, suspended between 2 skies, one blue and full of light, the other black and devoid of it. Well, to be more precise, only Sonny and Cassia were walking. Kai was levitating above the links of the ancient chain, while Effie was sitting comfortably on Sonny's shoulders. In fact, the little girl was so comfortable that she was fast asleep and drooling on his head. In other circumstances, Sonny would have been outraged and shaken the fiendish child awake. But right now, he was too preoccupied with grim thoughts. He wasn't even thinking about the creature they were about to face. No, his mind was still on the anvil talisman. Since Noctis was unable to create a second one, someone in their cohort was going to have to remain without any defense against the Prince of Nothing. And now, Sonny had to decide who. Was he going to give the charm to Kai or Effie? As if reading his thoughts, The little girl suddenly shifted, then yawned and opened her eyes.
God, Sonny, stop grinding your fangs so loud, will you? I can't sleep. What has gotten you so tense, anyway?
He hesitated for a few moments, then shared his concerns. Both Cassia and Kai listened, their faces turned as grim as his own. Effie, however, seemed unconcerned.
What? That's it? How is that a problem? Just give it to Kai, you doofus.
Sonny jumped down to the next link, holding Effie's skinny legs to prevent her from falling off, then asked,
Aren't you afraid of being consumed by Mordred?
The little girl grimaced.
You guys overestimate that Mordred guy a lot. He's not that dangerous.
Everyone grew silent, looking at her with doubt. Not dangerous. The 100 lost warriors, 2 ascended knights, and the whole of the northern reach of the Kingdom of Hope begged to differ. She shook her head.
What made him dangerous were the 6 cores he possessed. Inside the Soul Sea, that guy can mirror the aspect of his enemy, correct? He can use the same abilities, but charge them with the power of multiple cores.
Effie snorted.
Well, he doesn't have 6 cores anymore. He only has 1. Maybe 2 or 3 if he was very diligent and managed to create new ones. Doesn't really matter. My point is, he sacrificed his personal power to create 5 mere monsters, which made the overall threat he represents far greater, but the danger to one's soul far lesser.
She thought for a bit, and then added thoughtfully,
I would even say that what makes him truly dangerous are not his cores, but instead his skill and talent, his genius even when it comes to combat. The ability to mirror someone's aspect sounds terrifying, but think about it. How long did it take you to get a grasp on how to properly use your abilities? That guy has to fight someone with their own aspect seconds after coming into possession of it, which is not an easy feat.
The little girl yawned again, and then settled into a more comfortable position.
More than that, he also inherits the person's flaw. So actually, it's just a question of skill and experience. Let him invade my Soul Sea. I'll teach him some manners.
With that, Effie fell asleep once again. Sonny remained silent for a bit, then sighed and handed the anvil amulet to Kai, who received it with a doubtful expression on his face. Effie was not wrong. Now that Mordred did not possess an overwhelming advantage in raw power, this facet of his aspect was less dangerous. It all came down to the nature of the victim's abilities and their skill. Effie was far more skilled in combat than Kai was. More than that, her own aspect was all about physical might and melee combat, and he had never seen anyone more comfortable in their physicality than Effie. Even Mordred would find it difficult to utilize her aspect better. But still, looking ahead, he scowled and said,
Let's hope we don't have to find out whether you are right or not. There is still a chance that we will not become enemies with Mordred in this nightmare.
Effie shifted slightly, then said in a sleepy voice,
Of course I'm right. Now, let me nap in peace.
However, instead of doing that, Sonny shook her awake. The little girl sighed with irritation.
What?
He simply pointed forward.
We're here.
A few hundred or so feet ahead, the slope of a flying island rose upward from the heavenly chain. They had reached the tranquil lake. Sonny landed on the very edge of the island and froze there, looking forward with a dark expression on his bestial face. The others remained silent too, feeling his unease and tension. The land in front of them seemed tranquil, beautiful even. There was an expanse of vibrant green grass, and some distance away, it made way for the calm waters of a vast lake. Its surface was perfectly still and reflective, making it seem as though a piece of the blue sky above had somehow gotten embedded into the ground. A gentle wind caressed their faces, and nothing broke the peaceful silence, except for the rustle of grass and the distant rattling of chains. And yet, Sonny couldn't help but feel a sense of imminent danger. He sighed, and then glanced at his friends with uncertainty.
Should we summon our armor and weapons?
Kai hesitated for a moment, then said,
Wouldn't that be seen as a sign of distrust and hostility? Pure heart, pure thoughts, whatever that means, does not seem to fit with being armed and ready for a fight.
Sonny grimaced.
Yeah, but what if we do have to fight?
Effie smiled.
The four of us should be able to at least retreat safely, should things go wrong. I mean, how terrible can that thing be?
Sonny shivered, then shook his head.
Terrible enough for saints to fear it. I've been to this island a few times in the future, but stuck to the edges, never approaching the lake, so I don't actually know what kind of a creature lives in its depths. However, I did see bones lying on the shore, and those bones definitely looked like they belonged to things I would not want to meet.
He hesitated for a while, then glanced at Cassia.
What do you think?
The young woman tilted her head a little, and then said calmly, I don't feel any danger. Maybe Noctis was honest this time. Sonny sighed. Cassia's intuition had guided each of them through countless dangers unscathed. If she felt that it was safe, there was a good reason to listen. That didn't mean that he had to be happy about it, though.
All right. No weapons or armor for now. Just pure thoughts.
Together, they crossed the stretch of land between the edge of the island and the shore of the lake, stopping just a few steps away from the calm water. Despite how still it was, the reflective surface made it impossible to peer beneath the surface. Regardless, Sonny could feel something deep beneath the water, a vast and sprawling shadow, ancient, deep, unfathomable. He shivered and then cleared his throat, and feeling extremely stupid, addressed the lake.
I am here to retrieve the ruby knife. Please, give it to me?
There was a gust of wind, and nothing happened. Sonny's thoughts were already an anxious mess. Scouring his past,
Is it because of Harper? Or all the things I've done to survive in the outskirts?
a few moments later, Effie laughed.
Oh, I guess you are not pure, Sonny. Who would have thought?
He gritted his teeth, then growled at her angrily.
Go and try yourself then.
The little girl shook her head vigorously.
No. No one has ever accused me of being pure. I think. Although,
She thought for a bit, and then shrugged.
I guess I am in the body of a child.
The girl climbed down from Sonny's shoulders, approached the water, and stretched out a hand.
Can I please have the knife? Auntie from the lake?
Once again, nothing happened. Effie remained there for a few moments, then sighed and took a step back.
Figures.
Finally, both of them turned and stared at Kai. The young man hesitated for a few moments, then shook his head.
I think Cassia should try.
Sonny and Effie glanced at each other a little surprised, then shrugged and made way for the blind girl to approach the water. There was no harm in trying anyway. Cassia lingered for a few moments, then sighed and walked toward the shore. Stopping mere centimeters from the calm water, she lowered her head and said simply,
I am here for the ruby knife.
At first, Sunny thought that she had failed as well, but then the young woman suddenly paled and took a step back. There was a ripple on the surface of the lake, and although the vast shadow hidden within it did not move, something suddenly appeared from beneath the water. A pale white hand held a long knife, which seemed to be made of solidified blood. The hand rose from the water and offered it to Cassia, who suddenly trembled with her whole body and took another step back, shaking her head with a panicked look. Then, however, she stopped. Her bloodless lips turned into a straight line, and, gritting her teeth, the young woman returned to the shore. There, she knelt and leaned forward, taking the ruby knife from the deathly white hand. The hand let go of it easily and disappeared back into the water. And soon, nothing but a slowly dissipating ripple remained to remind them of its existence. Sunny observed all of this in shock.
It didn't move. The shadow did not even move,
he thought, sweat beading upon his brow. He was about to say something, but then the water rippled again, and another hand emerged. This one, black as coal and holding nothing. It slowly moved toward Cassia, then rose and softly caressed her cheek. The young woman flinched when the black flesh touched her, but remained in place. A few seconds later, the black hand retreated back into the lake as well. Cassia only moved when the ripples were gone, standing up and turning to them with a distant expression on her beautiful face. In the spot where the black hand touched her cheek, her skin turned gray and opened, drops of blood rolling down her chin. She was holding the ruby knife in her trembling hands. Sunny finally found himself able to speak.
What? What the hell was that?
Cassia remained motionless for a while, then suddenly shivered.
I don't know. Let's just get out of here, please?
He frowned but did not object. To tell the truth, Sunny couldn't wait to get away from the lake himself. As they were walking away, he briefly turned and looked at the tranquil water one last time. Was it an illusion? Or did the reflection of the sky on its surface seem darker? As they were walking back across the chains, he looked at Kai and asked, a bit of curiosity finding its way into his voice,
How did you know that it would give the knife to Cassia?
The blind girl turned her head slightly, as if equally interested to hear the answer. Even Effie seemed stumped. The young man glanced at them and shrugged, smiling beneath his wooden mask.
Pure heart, pure thoughts. All of us wondered what that means, right? Well, I think we all made a mistake because it didn't really matter how we understood it. The only thing that mattered was how Noctis had understood it centuries ago when he entrusted the knife to the creature.
He grew silent for a bit and then added,
He gave the ruby knife away after finding out that Hope was driving the Chain Lords mad, fearing what he might do with it should the worst happen. So, to him, purity of heart and thought meant something very specific. The ability to remain clear of mind, true to his oath, and loyal to his sacred duty. And while none of us is perfect, Cassia is the most clear-headed and dutiful person I know.
Sunny tilted his head, not sure if he agreed with that statement. The creature of the lake had, though, which meant that Kai was at least partially right. Or it had all just been a coincidence. As he was remembering the past with a dark expression on his face, the young man suddenly spoke again, his voice hoarse and somber.
That is why Noctis had sent us to retrieve the knife instead of coming himself, I guess. Because he has gone mad, betrayed his oath, and abandoned his duty. And we we are helping him walk even further on that path. Walk further into the madness until he reaches its end.
The journey back was, sadly, uneventful. At least Sonny viewed it that way. His friends all seemed relieved and embraced the brief respite. Sonny, on the other hand, had hoped that they would stumble upon a few nightmare creatures, but this close to the sanctuary, there weren't many, except for those too powerful for the cohort to attack without a serious reason and thorough preparations. Come to think, these powerful abominations were probably the reason why the weaker ones were kept away. Perhaps that was why Noctis had not eradicated them. Well, that, or he was simply too lazy. They returned to the sorcerer's stronghold at dawn and went to find him without wasting any time. However, Noctis was not at his residence, and the wooden door remained shut. Eventually, they located him at the far side of the island, where the immortal was making a statue. There were several giant slabs of marble laying on the ground, and a dozen or so chisels hacking at them without anyone's help. The sorcerer stood some distance away, his lustrous black hair powdered by marble dust, and watched it all with a satisfied expression on his face, while sipping from a glass of wine. The first of the statues seemed to be close to completion, or so Sonny thought. It certainly resembled something. It might have been a human, or a horse. Sonny found it hard to tell. Noticing them, Noctis grinned. "Oh, you're back." Then he looked at the hideous stone abomination and raised his chin proudly. "What do you think? Majestic, right?" Sonny hesitated for a few moments and then said cautiously,
That is one word to describe it, without a doubt. But what is it?"
The sorcerer frowned with confusion.
"What do you mean? It's me. A monument to me, that is. I have decided to grace the generations to come with a vision of my matchless beauty. They deserve the privilege of witnessing it as well. Who am I to devoid people of such blessing?"
He glanced at the terrifying marble monster, scratched the back of his head, and added,
"Of course, I might have failed to grasp a couple of nuances of the sculpting art just yet. This one is really not too bad, but it is just the first attempt. Luckily, I have plenty of these slabs to practice. 7 should be enough to reach perfection. Well, maybe 14 or 20.
Sonny stared at the hideous statue for a bit, quite sure that it looked more like a monstrous gargoyle than Noctis. Then he shook his head and said,
"Good for you. Meanwhile, we've retrieved the ruby knife, so what comes next?"
The sorcerer remained silent for a while, then sighed despondently.
"I guess it's time to take a break. Come, let's have something to eat, and drink, of course, and discuss the future. Now that the knives are in our possession, the future will surely be upon us soon enough."
Sometime later, they were enjoying a light breakfast in the shade of the ancient tree that grew in the heart of the sanctuary. Noctis poured himself some wine and then offered them a polite smile.
"You must be curious about what happens next."
The four of them glanced at each other and then nodded. The sorcerer shrugged.
"Well, to be honest, nothing much. By now, the other chain lords already know that I am collecting the knives. The death of the one in the north would have distracted them for a bit, but at the same time, it would have made my actions look much more suspicious. So, they will hold a council and decide how to act."
He took a sip of wine and smiled.
"However, getting Solvane and Servas into one room is not an easy task. It will take them some time to come together. After that, predictably, they will send a herald to give me some sort of an ultimatum. And only then After their polite request is denied, will they act, joining forces to invade my lands, capture me, and make me bitterly regret the fact that I am immortal?
Noctis shook his head, then laughed. Sunny, on the other hand, shivered and asked, his voice full of tension,
Is this really something to laugh about? How are we going to repel an attack of 3 transcendents?
The sorcerer grew silent, then shook his head.
Well, simply, we won't.
He took another sip of wine and looked up at the flying ship that hovered above them.
Instead, we will attack them first. We will lay siege to the Ivory City.
Noticing their stunned gazes, Noctis laughed again.
Children, you are so fun to talk to. These expressions are priceless. However, even younglings like you should have learned by now that having more power doesn't always mean achieving victory. The 3 lords that oppose us are very powerful indeed, but they are not without weaknesses.
He paused and then looked at them, his eyes glinting with a hint of moonlight.
To tell you the truth, neither Solvayne nor the Sun Prince concern me that much. The only one worth being scared of, the only one who can defeat me, is Severus, the Ivory Lord, that dreadful dragon. Because between all 7 of the Chain Lords, only he and I belong to divine bloodlines. Only the 2 of us trace our lineage to gods.
Sunny frowned.
Wait, aren't Severus and the Sun Prince brothers? How come he is the only one with a divine lineage?
Noctis shrugged.
All kinds of strange things happen when it comes to gods. Who knows? In any case, he is the only brother who inherited the fire. And he is formidable for it, beyond words. So, we won't be able to defeat Severus unless we strike at his flaw.
Sunny froze.
You know his flaw?
The sorcerer smiled gingerly, then chuckled.
Of course. We immortals spent more than 1,000 years bound together. I know all of their flaws, and they know mine. But Severus, that guy is rather special. In a sense, he actually has 3.
Noctis grew silent for a few moments, taking a sip from his glass. Then he sighed and said with a hint of sadness,
One is his actual flaw. The others, well, they perhaps weren't flaws before, but they certainly are now. One of them is his brother, and the last one, the most important of them all, is his city. Oh, he loves them so.
He looked at the beautiful garden of the sanctuary, his face turning cold and ruthless.
By using all 3, we will destroy him.
No one dared to speak for a few moments, unnerved by the sudden change in the sorcerer's mood. After a while, though, Effie tugged on his sleeve and asked,
Care to elaborate, Grandpa Noctis?
Noctis looked at her absent-mindedly, then flinched and jerked his sleeve away, wiping the spot where the girl touched it with a repulsed look.
Grandpa? Who are you calling a grandpa, you mangy critter?
He moved his chair away from Effie and stared at her menacingly for a moment, then threw a hurt look at Sunny. Sunny shrugged.
You are 1,000 years older than her.
The sorcerer opened his mouth with a deeply offended expression, then puffed and looked away. After a long and poignant pause, he continued.
Anyway, as I was saying, Severus has 3 weaknesses. The first one is his flaw. He is incredibly powerful during the day, but nearly powerless during the night. The second one is his brother. Surprising, I know, considering what he did to the poor guy. But the Ivory Lord still genuinely cares about his younger sibling. That is probably the only thing he cares about anymore, apart from his duty and principles.
Noctis grew quiet for a moment, and then added in a somber tone,
And the third one is his city. That Severus loves his people, but he also hates them. They are a burden that weighs heavily on his soul, one that he cannot escape. Their relationship had long been perverted by hope and by his own stubborn unwillingness to give up. Noble, righteous Severus. He might seem like the sanest among us, but in reality, he is the closest to utter madness. All it will take to send him over the edge is one little push.
The immortal transcendent sighed, then shook his head reproachfully.
That guy, truly, he has always been too serious. You can't survive in this place without a sense of humor, even if you are immortal.
The sorcerer giggled at his own joke and then looked at them with a relaxed smile.
We will attack at night when the ivory dragon Severax is at his weakest, and we will kill his younger brother before dawn. That will be the push that sends him into the abyss and dooms him.
Sonny shivered, looked at the immortal transcendent, and asked cautiously,
Is it wise to drive a dragon insane?
Hearing this, Noctis simply laughed.
Of course, Severus the Ivory Lord is fearsome and dreadful, but Severax the dragon is just a mindless beast. Killing a beast is not too difficult for a cunning hunter. And while I might not be as righteous and noble as Severus,
his smile disappeared, and his eyes suddenly shone with pale light.
I am the blood of the moon, the beast god, the god of hunters.
With that, the sorcerer leaned back and took a sip of his wine, slowly returning to his usual carefree self.
Granted, I have not hunted for a while. The wilderness is just so ghastly, you know. The dirt, the insects, the fashion. Oh, the horror.
He sighed heavily, and then smiled again. Sonny considered the mad sorcerer in front of him. There was a question that he really wanted to ask, but was not sure that he should. Finally, he said,
What is your flaw, then? I know that it is not the kind of question people ask or answer, but our lives will depend on your fight with the dragon. I think we have the right to know.
Noctis waved his hand dismissively.
Oh, it's nothing much. More or less the exact opposite of his. I am at my strongest under the moonlight, but grow weak in the sunlight. No reason to hide that from friends.
He thought for a bit, then added,
Solvain's flaw is perhaps the most cruel. She is cursed with beguiling beauty. Being with her slowly drives people mad with longing and lust, like an insidious drug. The more someone spends time with her, the more they want to possess her, eventually giving in to irresistible desire. A terrible fate, no doubt, but not exactly something we can use.
Noctis shook his head.
The Sun Prince's flaw? Well, it doesn't matter anymore. Now that he is encased in that steel monstrosity and almost mindless, we won't be able to make use of it anyway. We will just have to kill him in a straightforward manner. So, do you guys have any questions?
The four of them looked at each other. After a long pause, Kai asked hoarsely,
Yes, Lord Noctis, and just one. When we attack the Ivory City at night, and you are fighting the Sun Prince and Solvain, what exactly are we four supposed to do?
The sorcerer stared at them in confusion, then raised an eyebrow.
Why, is that not clear? While I am preoccupied with the Chain Lords, you will simply have to destroy the Sun Legion and the army of the Red Colosseum.
He thought for a bit, and then added,
Well, if you somehow fail to destroy them, at least keep them away from me for a while. Solvain and the Sun Prince. Yeah, shouldn't take me too long. I think you will manage.
At the precipice of night, Sonny came to the edge of the island alone and stood there for a while, shrouded in shadows. Now that things were nearing the final stage, there was a lot he had to think about. There was the seemingly insane plan of attacking the Ivory City, the battle the cohort was going to wage against 2 armies while saints fought in the skies above them. And then there was Mordred, who remained an unknown variable in this whole mess. What concerned him the most, however, was his unformed 4th Corps. Going into the dire battle as a devil would have been far better. What's more, he couldn't allow himself to undergo the debilitating process of forming a new corps in the midst of the furious clash. With the culmination of the nightmare swiftly approaching, he had no more time left to slowly seek out and kill nightmare creatures, and so Sonny was forced to do something that he had always been reluctant to do. With a sigh, he summoned his shadows. The taciturn knight, the Stygian steed, and the tenumbrous serpent appeared in front of him, their figures drowning in the darkness. 2 of his shadows slid forward and wrapped themselves around Nightmare and the Soul Serpent, with only the gloomy one remaining at his feet. Sonny lingered for a bit, and then said,
Go. Travel far and wide. Seek out nightmare creatures and kill them. I need you to hunt for me, instead of with me, for a while.
He paused, and then added somberly,
Be careful, however. This world is a dangerous place. No matter how strong you are, how powerful you are, there was always someone, or something, far stronger, especially when you are alone. So don't let yourself get destroyed, all right?
The saint stared at him for a few moments, then outstretched a hand. After he placed the hilt of the scarlet Odichi in it, she silently turned around and jumped down, landing on the links of the heavenly chain far below. The Nightmare and the Soul Serpent dashed in opposite directions, soon disappearing from view. Just like that, Sonny was left alone. He remained motionless for a few moments, then sighed and looked down at the gloomy shadow.
I guess it's just you and me again. Like old times, huh?
The shadow stared at him darkly for a second, and then raised a hand, clearly unsure what good times he was talking about exactly. Sonny smiled.
Yeah, love you too, buddy.
Soon after the shadows left, the connection Sonny shared with them grew faint. He could still feel their existence, but not much beyond that. The same happened with the happy and creepy shadows. When the Nightmare and the Soul Serpent left the range of shadow control, which had grown to about 4 kilometers, he lost the ability to perceive them, and the world through them. Sonny felt that they were out there, somewhere, but that was it. The sudden loss of being able to see and hear through 2 out of his 3 shadows was abrupt and jarring, as though he had suddenly lost an eye and a limb. It made Sonny feel very uncomfortable. Not only was his power severely diminished in the absence of his loyal companions, making him extremely vulnerable, but he also worried about them. There had been many opportunities to send the Saint away to hunt on her own in the past, but Sonny never did. The risk was just too high, both for the shadow and for himself. They were stronger together. Shadows were not meant to be apart from their master, but there was no other choice now. He did not know when the 3 chain lords were going to act exactly, but there was not much time left before the final confrontation began. Sonny had to become a devil. Nephis was already a tyrant after all. It would not do to let her remain so far ahead. With a sigh, he turned around and walked back to his room. The gloomy shadow followed, trying to not show that it, too, missed its siblings. The shadows were gone, but there was still a lot Sonny had to do. He had to prepare himself for the battle, both mentally and physically. The next few days passed without too much happening. Sunny trained archery with Kai, practiced swordsmanship with Cassia, and sharpened his mastery of the spear with Effie's help. The other three were busy with their own preparations as well. From time to time, all four left the sanctuary to hunt and put their teamwork to the test. Sunny received a few fragments from those small expeditions as well. In the night, he continued to experiment with weaving. However, he was also careful to get enough sleep. It would not do to go into the battlefield exhausted. After several days of this, while Sunny was laying in bed, the spell suddenly whispered into his ear,
You have slain a fallen monster, Veiled Slayer. Your shadow grows stronger.
Sunny sat up and stared into the darkness, tense. So, one of them had found a prey. He did not know which one it was, saint, serpent, or nightmare, or even if they were wounded in the fight. All he knew was that one of his shadows had emerged victorious and was not destroyed. After that first kill, the shadow fragments started to pour into his soul frequently, making the goal of forming a new core before the fateful clash seem less hopeless. In the meantime, all Sunny could do was carry on. 2 weeks of practicing weaving later, he could proudly say that he had successfully managed to destroy 38 out of the 39 memories received in the Red Colosseum. The only one remaining was the Emerald Bone Flute. However, that saved him from damaging his actual memories at least. After the initial success of transplanting enchantments, Sunny found out that it was not as easy as he had thought. Well, it had never really been easy, but now he realized that there were more things that he had to consider than simply the pattern of the weave itself. Each memory had a certain capacity when it came to accommodating enchantments. The more powerful an enchantment was, the more burden it put on the weave. To withstand it, weaves needed to be moored to anchors, each serving as a nexus for the strings of essence. Sunny created those anchors from soul shards. The more he used, the higher the tier of the memory was, and the higher its capacity. However, the rank of the shards also played a role, albeit in a slightly different manner. Apart from capacity, weaves also had a threshold of intensity they could withstand. More powerful enchantments put too much strain on the strings and the anchors, and so both the strings and the anchors had to be of high enough rank to endure it. Additionally, only the weakest of enchantments could be activated passively, relying on the memory's own ambient soul energy. Everything else would only function when saturated by the flow of essence from the wielder's soul. But that was not all. Sunny had found out the hard way that not all memories could accommodate all enchantments, regardless of whether they had enough capacity and tolerance. Some were simply not meant for each other. He suspected that the name of the memory, and therefore its nature, played a role in that. He had transferred the sonorous enchantments to the silver bell and the ordinary rock, and also made the ordinary rock, which had been able to repeat the sounds it heard, repeat the words Sunny thought of as well. Both of these changes improved upon the original qualities of the memories. Instead of introducing something entirely new, they were not in conflict with their natures. However, when he tried to do something more radical, the results were disastrous. He could not add an enchantment meant to destroy a memory that was meant to protect, unless he wanted the whole weave to break apart. It was not easy to understand the true nature of memories, however. The Patient Avenger, for example, was a shield, and its purpose was to protect its master. And yet, that shield possessed enchantments capable of sowing utter devastation on the battlefield. So, it took Sunny a lot of time and a lot of wasted memories to get an initial grasp on the nuances of what enchantments he could transfer and where. The hint was under his nose the whole time. The name of the memory hid the secret of its nature. He was still unable to fully grasp it, but after destroying dozens of memories, Sonny managed to develop an intuitive sense that allowed him to glean the general direction of things at least. It was not much, but it was something. At the start of their 5th month in the second nightmare, Sonny found himself on a somewhat familiar island. Some distance away from him, a forest of tall trees stood, darkness nesting between their trunks. The forest looked different from how it had been in the future. There, the trees were twisted and bent, their bark turned dark and rough. But here, they had no need to change and adapt to the devastating burden of the crushing yet, and so the forest stood tall. The wolves, however, were more or less the same. The nightmare creature lunging at him was the size of a small truck, with fur as tough as steel wire and a long, terrifying muzzle. Its jaws were wide enough to bite a human in half, and strong enough to crush both bones and armor into dust. As the giant beast jumped at him, Sonny dodged left and allowed Effie to barrel into the creature, her fist sending it flying to the ground with a whimper. A second later, an arrow landed from above, piercing one of the wolf's paws and nailing it to the ground. A slender rapier flashed through the air, doing the same with another. Effie appeared near the wolf, pressing it down with all her inhuman strength, and shouted,
Come on, the bastard is strong. Really strong.
Sonny did not make them wait. Jumping forward, he brandished the cruel sight and buried it deep between the abomination's 6 glowing eyes. Almost instantly, the flame of madness burning in them dimmed and then was extinguished. Sonny sighed as the spell whispered,
You have slain a fallen monster, Dread Wolf. Your shadow grows stronger.
He did not need the help of the cohort to slay a Dread Wolf, of course. These vile beasts were easy prey for someone like him. He did, however, require their assistance for what was about to happen next. Summoning the runes, Sonny found the familiar string of them. The runes read,
Shadow fragments, 3,000 out of 3,000.
He prepared himself, and a moment later, the voice of the spell resounded again.
Your shadow is overflowing with power.
It was time for him to become a devil. Sonny sighed, then dismissed the runes, feeling the familiar heat igniting deep within his soul, growing stronger and stronger with each breath. Effie and Kai looked at him, curiosity and concern mixing in their eyes. Cassia silently retrieved the quiet dancer and turned away, listening to the dark forest that surrounded them. A few moments later, Effie asked,
So, what exactly happens now?
Sonny gave her a grim look.
Now I will scream and thrash for a while. Forming a new core is probably the 3rd worst pain I have ever experienced. And that was just the demon core. Damnation.
Effie blinked a couple of times.
What are the second and absolute worst, then?
He hesitated for a bit, and then said hoarsely,
Attaining a daemon's lineage was pretty bad, but the most terrible thing by far was catching a glimpse of fate. That one I only survived by accident.
The gloomy shadow shivered, remembering their past. Sonny, meanwhile, scoffed.
Being gutted by the Black Knight did not even make the list,
He thought.
Maybe I need to rethink my life choices.
At that moment, the heat burning within his soul reached a critical point, and the spell whispered into his ear.
Your shadow is taking shape.
A blinding pain exploded in his chest, sending Sonny to his knees. He gritted his teeth and remained silent, refusing to let out a shriek, a wail, or even a growl. This was not his first time experiencing that pain, even though this time it was far more intense. A human soul was not meant to contain many cores. That was the conclusion Sunny had come to a while back, thinking about how the process of awakening was pleasant and euphoric, but gaining new cores and a demon's lineage was harrowing and torturous. Humans were meant to walk the path of ascension, but becoming a different type of creature was against their nature. And Weaver's lineage was simply against all nature. It was aberrant and forbidden, something that was never meant to exist at all. Ah! The pain grew stronger and stronger, and then stronger still. Just like before, he felt as though his soul was being torn apart, something rising from its depths and cutting his very being with its sharp edges. However, Sunny was used to this torment. He accepted it, allowed himself to dissipate into it, and endured. However, then, something entirely unexpected happened. As his soul was going through a transformation, his body followed suit as well, catching him by surprise. This time, Sunny failed to suppress a scream and fell to the ground in convulsions. Effie and Kai stared at him with worry.
Ah, curse it! What the hell?
It felt as though his bones were breaking, his muscles were tearing, and his skin was on fire. Sunny clawed at the ground, then raised his head and let out a deafening, furious roar. As it rolled across the forest, the roar changed, growing lower and more frightening. Finally, an eternity later, the heat consuming his soul grew cold, and his tortured body was released from the cage of suffering. Sunny exhaled hoarsely, then relaxed and remained laying on the grass, motionless. The voice of the spell resounded from the darkness, echoing between the ancient trees.
Your shadow is complete.
A few moments later, he heard another voice, this one soft and childish.
God damn, he's even bigger now.
Sunny slowly stood up, intending to take a look at his runes. However, even before that, he noticed that something was different. The ground was considerably further down than it had been before.
Huh?
Effie and Kai were staring at him, forgetting their task of watching out for a potential attack. Luckily, Cassia was still vigilant. Sunny frowned, then glanced down to take a look at his own body as well. It seemed that because he was in the body of a creature, the transformation into a devil changed it, too. The shadow demon, devil, grew even taller, now standing at almost 10 feet in height. His skin had turned into a darker shade of gray, and his claws seemed as if they were cut out of glossy onyx. Through the eyes of his shadow, Sunny could see that his horns had grown longer and sharper as well. More than that, there were now 4 of them. Well, 3.5, considering that one had been broken in the ferocious fight with the ascended war maiden Hildy. And his eyes, which had been entirely black previously, now seemed like 2 pools of eerie darkness. The shadow spawn had been fearsome before, but now he was simply terrifying. Even Sunny himself would not have been happy to meet this towering fiend on a moonless night. Effie shook her head, then looked away.
My neck hurts from staring at you. Is this how everyone feels when they're talking to me?
Kai hesitated, then smiled slightly.
Well, that is presuming that they are looking at your face.
The little girl snorted.
Wow, good one. You've been hanging out with Sunny way too much, it seems. Or, with me?
Ignoring her jabs, Sunny curiously looked at the ground. He had gained a new shadow. What would its personality be? 2 identical shadows of a 4-armed devil were there, staring at each other. But to Sunny, they seemed very different. One was gloomy and glowering, full of bad mood and disdain. The other was also full of disdain, but of another kind. The new one felt strangely noble and gallant, almost like a regal knight. He seemed to be looking at the other shadow with arrogant contempt. They were of the exact same height, and yet the haughty shadow somehow made it seem as if it was looking down at the gloomy one, and everyone else for that matter. When the creepy shadow appeared, it lost the staring contest to the gloomy shadow. The haughty shadow, however, did not seem impressed, even a little bit. It was as though the very thought of looking away was beneath it. So the two of them just continued to drill holes into each other with disdainful stares, unperturbed. Sunny groaned, then covered his face with a hand.
Oh gods, there's two of them now.
Observing the staring contest, Sunny sighed. He was beginning to miss the happy shadow, that hopeless fool. Shaking his head, Sunny looked away from the shadows and summoned the runes. The familiar symbols shimmered in the air in front of him.
Name, Sunless. True name, Lost from Light. Rank, Awakened. Class, Devil. Shadow cores, 4 out of 7. Shadow fragments, 0 out of 4,000.
A tired but satisfied smile appeared on his lips. With a 4th core, his power would increase significantly. His essence reserves had grown, the range of shadow control had expanded, and most importantly, he now had an additional shadow to augment either himself, his memories, or his shadows. He could increase his physical prowess 5-fold, or send one each to Saint, Serpent, and Nightmare, while leaving one for himself. And that was not all. The Soul Serpent evolved its class when Sunny did, so it should have become a devil as well. That would make it the most powerful, at least in terms of pure status, shadow of his. Not wasting any time, Sunny summoned the serpent's runes. Somewhat tense, he read,
Shadow, Soul Serpent. Shadow rank, Ascended. Shadow class, Devil. Shadow attributes, Shadow guide, Soul weapon, Soul beast.
Sunny was both glad and worried. Glad because his shadow had attained a new class, but worried because he did not see any new attributes. The transformation to a devil was supposed to gift creatures terrible and unnatural powers. However, the serpent was a bit strange in that regard. It had received a new ability out of order when rising to a new rank. So, would it receive anything now? Luckily, he was wrong to fear. Looking lower, Sunny saw a few new runes among the serpent's abilities.
Shadow abilities, Serpentine Steel, Soul Reaver, Grace of Shadows, Formless.
The formless one was new. Sunny concentrated on it and studied the description curiously. The runes read,
Formless, ability description. When in the Soul Beast form, the serpent can assume the shape of any shadow contained within its master's soul, inheriting all powers and abilities. The shadow must be of the same or lower rank and class than the Soul Serpent for the transformation to take place, and won't be consumed in the process.
Soon after settling into his new and improved body, Sunny dismissed his shadows. He expected them to instantly return to his cores, but this time, there was a delay. It seemed that he had to wait for some time before the Saint, the Nightmare, and the Soul Serpent returned. And then there were the happy and the creepy shadows. Poor guys were going to have to come back the usual way, by gliding across the Kingdom of Hope, one island at a time. They were swift and sneaky, so Sunny was not too worried about them. He also knew that the shadows always sensed in which direction to go to return to their master. Sunny had gained this bit of knowledge a while back when his experiments with Shadow Step left the gloomy guy outside of the range of shadow control. The shadow had swiftly returned, acting even more petulant and moody than usual. Its mood had only grown worse when Sunny decided to try and repeat the accident a few more times, just to make sure. But as a result, he learned that once separated from him, the shadows would always try to find their way back to their master, somehow sensing where he was. And speaking of shadows, the haughty newcomer was still acting cavalier, radiating a disdainful certainty that it was, without a doubt, better and more distinguished than everyone and everything, in every way imaginable. Sunny shook his head and silently commanded the haughty shadow to wrap itself around his body, which it did, but not before giving him a look that clearly expressed how utterly beneath itself the arrogant guy considered such a trivial task to be. The members of the cohort had already collected the soul shards from the slain abominations, so there was nothing holding them on the island anymore. They started the journey back to the sanctuary and returned to it at dusk. On the way, Sunny was trying to get used to his new physique. Sure, the shadow spawn had grown taller and more powerful, but as a side effect of that, he had to relearn how to move in this towering body all over again. The shock was not as dire as when he had first appeared in the second nightmare, but it would still require some time for Sunny to be able to adjust his mindset and battle technique for this new circumstance. Tired after the day of hunting nightmare creatures and traversing the heavenly chains, the four of them separated to go to their rooms. Reaching his own, Sunny fell on the bed, which was now a bit too short for him, and stared at the ceiling for some time, feeling restless and grim. Today, he had accomplished something that he never thought would be possible in such a short span of time. He had formed the fourth Shadow Core and become a devil. He was now more powerful than he had ever been, with 3 mighty shadows by his side, an arsenal of powerful memories at his disposal, and even possessing a nascent knowledge of sorcery and weaving. In fact, Sunny suspected that there had never been an awakened as powerful as him, except, of course, for Mordret. At least until Nephis returned from being lost in the dream realm and awakened herself. And yet, he couldn't help but wonder, would that be enough for what was about to come? And if he survives the second nightmare, would it still be possible for him to hide his strength and avoid the gaze of sovereigns? Tormented by these questions, Sunny remained awake for a long time, and then, finally, fell into the embrace of shallow sleep. When the morning came, he opened his eyes and instantly sensed a difference. His heart felt at ease somehow, complete. His shadows had returned while he slept. Luckily, all 3 had survived their task. However, they were not unscathed. Both the nightmare and the soul serpent bore many wounds, and nestled in the nurturing black flames of his cores, slumbering as their bodies restored themselves. The saint was banged up too, but to a much lesser extent. Even though she had not had the company of a shadow, the taciturn knight fared much better than the other 2. Well, that was not a surprise. She possessed attributes that specifically made her tremendously stalwart and durable after all. Plus, the saint was the saint. In any case, she was going to heal and recover much faster. The happy and creepy shadows had returned as well, and were now staring at their new sibling, the former with delighted excitement, the latter with dark and disturbing fascination. The haughty shadow ignored their stares and pretended that the others did not exist, looking past them with flawlessly disdainful indifference.
What a character.
Sunny smiled, then commanded the 3 shadows to wrap themselves around his body, leaving only the gloomy one on the ground. Finally feeling like himself, he climbed out of bed, freshened up, and went to find Noctis. There was a lot they had to discuss. When he saw the sorcerer, however, the words died on his tongue. Noctis was not on board his flying ship, and neither was he on the edge of the island, sculpting his terrible statues. Instead, the immortal transcendent had returned to his residence for once. The wooden door stood open, and the sailor dolls let Sonny through without sparing him a single glance. The interior of the sorcerer's quarters had changed once again. The floor stood cracked and broken, mounds of stone shards arching upward as if displaced by something rising from below. The circle of runes was broken as well, devoid of any essence and utterly empty. That, however, was not what scared Sonny. What made him stumble, instead, was that Noctis was not holding a glass of wine, as had been his habit. Instead, the sorcerer was whistling a carefree tune and brewing himself tea. Sonny froze.
Oh, crap.
What had it been that the sorcerer told him soon after they met? Gather the knives, start a war against both the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum, kill all of the Chain Lords, defy the Lord of Light, break the will of gods, release the Demon of Desire out of her prison, and have a cup of tea. But then Noctis corrected himself and said that he should probably have tea first. Sonny gulped.
It's starting.
As Sonny was standing still, petrified by what he saw, Noctis finished brewing the tea and poured the amber liquid into a beautiful porcelain cup. Then, the sorcerer raised it to his face, inhaled the fragrant steam, and then let out a satisfied sigh. Then, noticing an unexpected guest, he glanced at Sonny and smiled.
Sunless, what a nice surprise. Wait, did something about you change?
The sorcerer tilted his head with a confused expression, studied the towering figure of the Shadow Devil for a few moments, and then suddenly brightened up.
Oh, it's your horn. When did you break it?
Really? That's what he noticed?
He thought. Sonny stared at the cup in the immortal's hands, then grasped the extraordinary rock. He didn't really have to hold the memory to make use of it, but at the moment, Sonny was experiencing a desperate need to hold on to something. Anything. Taking a careful breath, he gripped the rock and spoke hoarsely.
Back in the Temple of the Chalice, you were drinking tea.
Noctis lingered for a bit, glanced at his cup, and then smiled.
What a prudent observation. Come, let's not let this nice tea get cold.
With that, the sorcerer turned around and headed deeper into his residence, gesturing for Sonny to follow. The teapot flew into the air and hovered above the immortal's shoulder as well. As soon as Sonny made a step forward, however, Noctis suddenly turned, looked at him with a strange expression, and said,
That's, try not to step on anything that seems to be... Actually, just don't move at all. We don't want anything to happen, right?
At that moment, the chamber trembled again, and more cracks appeared on its stone floor. Sonny stared down with a somber expression, then sighed and used Shadow Step to appear near the sorcerer.
Why? What's under there?
Noctis smiled.
Oh, nothing. Just, a memento of an old friend. Don't worry about it.
Sonny, however, did worry. He was not a complete fool. The vast circle of runes, the torrential flood of soul essence that the sorcerer saturated it with, the pool of blood that the ancient stones had absorbed. All of it pointed to something dreadful being imprisoned, or maybe created, there in the darkness of the earth. However, he thought better of asking any questions and simply followed Noctis to the stone stairs situated on the other side of the chamber. Using them, they ascended to the top of the ring of giant menhirs and sat down at an elegant wooden table. The sorcerer leaned back in his chair, gazed upon the breathtaking vista of the Kingdom of Hope, and took a sip of tea with an expression of deep satisfaction on his face. Sunny lingered for a few moments, giving Noctis time to enjoy himself, and then asked,
It has begun, hasn't it? The other chain lords, are they ready to make their move?
The sorcerer took another sip, sighed, and then said in a relaxed tone,
Oh, indeed. I suspect that their herald will arrive in a few days. You may as well take this time to relax a bit. Enjoy the tea. This will probably be the last moment of peace you will have for a while, Sunless. Or maybe even the very last.
Sunny remained silent for a long time, a myriad of important questions pressing on his mind. But then, he simply shook his head, chased them away, and poured some tea into a delicate cup that stood on the table as if waiting for him. Neither of them spoke for a while, enjoying the fragrant drink and the beautiful sight of the flying islands in peace. Despite the approaching doom, the world felt tranquil and warm here, on the parapet of the sanctuary. After a while, Noctis sighed and said in a wistful tone,
I am going to miss this, I think.
Then, he glanced at Sunny and asked with a hint of curiosity in his voice,
Tell me, Sunless, why are you here? It is no surprise that someone like me would want to free Hope. But what would compel a shadow like you to attempt it as well? You must know the risk.
Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then sighed.
To tell you the truth, I don't really know. I used to know, or at least think that I knew. I had lofty desires to grow stronger than others, to break free from the chains of fate, and maybe I harbor those desires still. But after coming to this cursed land and being ground into dust by it, now everything is so unclear, and my ardent desires suddenly seem so lacking.
He paused, looked down, and then added evenly,
Or maybe it is just me who is lacking and lost.
Noctis glanced at him, took a sip of tea, and asked with a curious smile,
What is it that you think you are lacking? And from what are you lost?
Sunny did not speak immediately, letting the pressure of the flaw build inside his soul for a few moments. Then he said with a grin,
How should I know? If I had an answer for that, I wouldn't be feeling this way, would I?
He chuckled, and then asked,
Have you heard the legend of a hero named Odysseus?
Noctis blinked a couple of times, then shook his head.
Never heard of the guy. A legend, really? Huh. Strange that some third-rate hero I don't even know got to have a whole legend to himself.
Sunny smiled.
A good friend told me that legend. Odysseus spent 10 years away from home, fighting a war in a distant land. And then, he spent 10 more years trying to find his way back home. He lost all his friends and endured countless hardships, facing terrible monsters and dangerous beings of all sorts. But he never gave up, and eventually returned home to Ithaca.
His smile disappeared, replaced by a distant expression. After a few moments of silence, Sunny sighed.
I feel like Odysseus too sometimes, lost in a distant land. Only, unlike him, I don't have a home to want to return to. I have nothing to strive for, apart from saving my skin, keeping my friends alive, and maybe living a little bit better than a wild beast. Can someone really be lost if they don't belong anywhere?
Noctis took a sip of his tea, solemnly pondered on it for a bit, and then said thoughtfully,
I see. I understand. So, what you lack is a house. That is why you are trying to free Hope. To get a house. Wait. Sunless, are you trying to say that you want to repossess the Ivory Tower?
Sunny choked on his tea, then glared at the sorcerer with outrage.
What? Even? No! That is not what I am saying. Home is just a metaphor, you mortal fool.
Noctis blinked a couple of times, then asked with a deadpan expression,
What's a metaphor?
Sunny stared at him for a few moments, then snorted and opened his mouth, intending to answer. Before he did, however, a loud rattling of chains resounded in the air, and the whole sanctuary shuddered slightly beneath them. No, it was the island itself. The whole island trembled. Sunny froze, and then asked, his voice tense and grim,
What the hell was that?
Noctis calmly finished his tea, closed his eyes in delight for a moment, and then looked west.
It's their herald, I guess. He seems to have arrived sooner than I expected. What a bother. We didn't even get to drink the whole pot.
Noctis sighed, then placed his empty cup on the table and stood up. He straightened the folds of his silk garment, then shook his head with a slight smile and headed across the stone plain of the Menhirs. Sunny scrambled to catch up to him, full of apprehension. The first thing he said to the sorcerer, however, had nothing to do with the messenger of the Chain Lords.
A metaphor is a figure of speech. Sort of like an analogy?
Noctis glanced at him with surprise.
I must say your composure is commendable, Sunless. However, do you really think that this is very important right now? Come now, we need to meet our visitor before he reaches the sanctuary.
The sorcerer gestured at the silhouette of the flying ship that hovered some distance away, almost at the same height as them. Sunny summoned the Dark Wing and then said,
No, I don't. Why can't we meet the Herald here, though? No. Wait. If he has not even reached the sanctuary yet, why is the island shaking?
Noctis shrugged and gracefully rose into the air, flying toward the ship. If that meant he was used to doing so, Sunny did not know. All he could do was jump as high as he could and then glide forward. The sorcerer glanced at him and then said somberly,
If we were to meet the Herald here, my beautiful sanctuary might, well, get damaged. That would not do. As to why the island is shaking, I guess we'll see.
Soon, they landed on the deck. The sailor dolls had already raised the sails and were hurrying around, preparing the ship for departure. Cassia, Kai, and Effie were also there. Although they seemed to have arrived only moments before Sunny and Noctis. As Sunny looked at them with a silent question, Effie simply nodded toward Cassia. The mystery of their swift reaction was easily revealed. The sorcerer went to the stern of the flying ship without wasting any time, and took his position with the guide, who steered the ship as it flew through the air. The ancient vessel had no steering wheel, of course, and instead relied on 2 steering oars, which were situated at the very rear of it. There was a runic circle inscribed between the oars. Noctis stepped inside, turned, leaned comfortably on the bending inner surface of the tall apluster, and placed his hands on the oars with a relaxed expression on his face. A moment later, the circle shimmered with ethereal light. The flying ship had to be controlled both physically and with soul essence. There were invisible energy pathways spanning the whole length of it, all leading to the roots of the beautiful tree growing around the main mast. Luckily, it was the tree that produced the tremendous flow of essence required to propel the vessel through the air. Otherwise, Cassia would have never been able to fly it in the future. However, the pilot still needed to control that flow and serve as its nexus, and so only an awakened could do it. Or a transcendent. Noctis sent his own essence into the runic circle, connecting his soul to the ship, and the ancient vessel slowly started to move, gaining speed as the wind filled its sails. Holding the oars with a carefree smile, the sorcerer then glanced at Cassia and said, "Song of the Fallen, my lady, you wished to observe how I control this beauty. Here is your chance to see a master at work. Truly, there is no helmsman more skilled and distinguished than me in the whole of the Kingdom of Hope. Granted, this flight won't be too long." He suddenly grew silent, glanced at the blind girl with a guilty expression on his face, and then awkwardly cleared his throat. "Well, I guess see was the wrong word to use. Cassia remained silent for a few moments, then said neutrally, "I am used to it. Do not worry." Knowing that the young woman had been interested in the flying ship and its mysteries, Sunny left the two of them alone and walked to the side, staring into the distance with a tense look on his face. Noctis had failed to explain why the approach of the herald caused the sanctuary to tremble, but Sunny had an idea. The islands were all connected to each other by the heavenly chains, and so any strong tremor was bound to spread outward like a wave. The question was, what could have caused a quake strong enough for them to feel from several islands away? Perhaps a giant steel colossus could. He gritted his teeth.
A messenger of the Chain Lords? Was that a joke? Noctis conveniently failed to mention that this herald was going to be one of those lords himself.
And what the hell had the sorcerer meant, saying that they had to meet the herald elsewhere to avoid damaging the sanctuary? Weren't they simply going to speak? That was what messengers were for, weren't they? To deliver words? As several islands flowed past beneath the speeding ship, he suddenly caught sight of an especially familiar one. Of course, in this era it looked different. The Iron Hand Island was still rather large and covered by soft grass. But the ancient stone columns that had been broken in the future still stood tall, forming 3 concentric circles. From above, they seemed like a giant sundial, or moondial perhaps. And of course, there was no colossal iron hand laying in the center of the island to give it the peculiar name. At least not yet. Sunny suddenly felt cold shivers run down his spine. He didn't have time to think about it more, however, because at that moment, something else attracted his attention. Some distance away, shrouded in the haze of dawn, he could see the neighboring island. It was still in a higher position than them. The island suddenly swayed, and a small human figure jumped from its edge. Or rather, it just seemed small because of the distance. Sunny felt Kai grow still and tense by his side. As the sun shined on its steel surface, the figure flew through the air, covering an unimaginable distance with its leap. It seemed to be moving slowly, but Sunny knew that this was just a mirage caused by the scale of things. And indeed, the radiant figure grew larger and larger with each moment, turning into a brilliant steel giant as it drew closer. Easily breaching several kilometers with his jump, the giant landed on the surface of the Iron Hand Island, causing the whole of it to lurch sideways and sway. The heavenly chains rattled wildly, and a cloud of debris was raised into the air. Not paying the chaos he had caused any attention, the Colossus then slowly straightened, grew motionless, and then slightly turned his head. He was looking directly at the flying ship, no expression written on his beautiful steel face. Two suns reflecting in the polished surface of his steel eyes. The Sun Prince had come to deliver a message to Noctis. Looking at the Colossus, Sunny understood why Kai had called him terrifying. The Sun Prince stood at nearly 300 feet tall, towering above the island like a mountain of steel. He was cast in the shape of a noble warrior wearing light armor. The surface of the armor was polished and shone blindingly in the sun, while the rest of the giant was dull and gray. The colossal statues of the 7 heroes of the Forgotten Shore, including the walking one Sunny and the cohort had ridden once, were more than twice as tall, but it was hard not to get shocked by the sheer mass and crushing presence of the transcendent Chain Lord, or rather, of the steel shell he was entombed within. A sickening feeling of fear grasped Sunny's heart, which he then strangled and banished, looking at the towering lord with a grim expression. He had a reason to feel fear, though. A half-forgotten image of a nightmarish scene flashed before his eyes, a fragment of a nightmare where he stood petrified on a blood-soaked battlefield, watching in horror as a giant steel soul descended from above to turn him and his fellow soldiers into puddles of crushed bones and bloody sludge. And another, a memory of endless harrowing torture that he had endured at the hands of his brother, of a human-shaped cage and a pit filled with molten metal. And finally, the last one, the vision of a giant steel corpse swinging forlornly in torn chains, upside down, its chest shattered by some devastating strike. So, this was Sun Prince. Sunny had never met him, and yet it felt as though they were old acquaintances, for better and for worse. As the giant stared at the flying ship with the motionless face of a statue, Sunny turned to Noctis and scowled.
Now what?
The sorcerer sighed, then moved one of the oars, sending the vessel into a descent. His carefree smile was starting to look a little forced. Now? Well, we go and talk to him, I guess. Have a civilized discussion. Sunny turned back and looked at Sun Prince for a bit, then said somberly,
Do you think he knows that it was you who erased his memory of hiding the ivory knife? That you caused him to experience 100 years of torture and then end up in this state? And that it was you who stole it instead?
Noctis suddenly choked, causing the ship to careen sideways, and hissed, Say it louder, why don't you? Sunny glared at Noctis. The sorcerer righted the vessel. First of all, I did not cause anything. I just granted a colleague's request. Back then, we did not even know that Hope was driving us all mad, so how was I supposed to know what would happen? Secondly, I did not steal the ivory knife. I just happened to find it where he had left it, all right? By pure coincidence. And lastly... He paused, and then added in a darker tone, I am not sure that he really knows anything anymore. He is still alive, somewhere inside, but I don't think he is fully sentient. At least I hope he isn't. The ship approached the ground in somber silence, stopping just outside the first ring of pillars, and hovered in place. Noctis lingered for a few moments, and then let go of the oars. But he did not command the sailor dolls to lower the sails. The sorcerer straightened his garments, and then inhaled deeply. Let's go and see what he has to say, shall we? Sonny glanced at his friends, then shook his head and followed Noctis. There was a high chance that they were going to witness a brawl between saints. He was sure that everyone understood what danger they were all in. The last time he witnessed two saints fighting, a whole island had been destroyed and crumbled into the sky below. Sonny and Cassia had only survived that terrifying clash by promptly running away, and even then, they just barely made it out alive. What was going to happen today? And was Noctis strong enough to ward off the Colossus? Somehow, it was hard to imagine anything, let alone the flimsy sorcerer, stopping that mountain of steel. But Noctis was no fool. Surely, he had a plan. His madness was of an insidious kind, after all. He would not have risked his safety and his desire to free Hope without having a way out. Together, the five of them disembarked the flying ship, landed on the soil of the Iron Hand Island, and walked between the tall pillars. They approached the very center of the giant moon dial and stopped there, waiting. When they did, Sun Prince finally moved, walking toward them with a measured gait. With each of his steps, the island trembled, causing the heavenly chains to rattle and their hearts to tremble. Sonny was staring at the approaching Colossus, feeling worse and worse about the situation. All his shadows were yet to recover, and so he was left with nothing but his own strength to react should something happen. Well, his own strength and that of his cohort. But what could they do against this monstrosity, even together? Finally, the giant reached the pillars and stopped outside the outward circle, looking at them from high above. Drowned in his cold shadow, Sonny couldn't help but feel like a tiny insect. Looking up with a grave expression, he gritted his teeth and said,
"I feel like an ant."
Effie, who was also craning her neck to stare at the Colossus, glanced at him, hesitated for a moment, and then smiled.
You are not an ant, Sonny. You are a cockroach, remember?
He blinked a couple of times, then slowly grinned. Somehow, that made him feel better. And then, a thundering voice suddenly resounded from all around them, making their bones rattle. The giant spoke.
Noctis, you have the knives.
The voice of Sun Prince did not sound human, but neither did it sound robotic. It was just strange and empty, as if it was not a person speaking, but the world itself. A desolate world, full of ruins. Hearing it, the sorcerer grimaced and then covered his ears.
Huh? He still remembers how to speak.
The thundering voice of the Colossus resounded once more, making them shiver.
Surrender the knives.
Sonny turned his head slightly and glanced at Noctis, wondering what his reaction would be. The sorcerer, meanwhile, blinked a few times and took a big step back, distancing himself from Sonny. Then he raised a hand and pointed a finger at Sonny and said with sincere confusion,
What are you talking about? I don't have any knives. It's this guy over here. He has them. So, if you want them, come and take them from him. Leave this poor sorcerer out of this, by the moon.
Sonny froze in place, dumbfounded, and just stood still for a moment. Surrounded by stunned silence, all he could hear was the wild beating of his heart and the hum of blood rushing in his ears. His eye twitched.
No way. No way the bastard just did this to me.
All four of his shadows wrapped themselves around his body. Sonny turned his head slightly and stared at the sorcerer's finger, which was, without a shadow of a doubt, pointing straight at his broad back. His mouth turned dry.
He did.
What the hell was Noctis thinking? No, this couldn't be. The sorcerer would never have sold him out. Of course not. That meant, yes, shifting the blame on Sonny had to be a con of some sort. Had to be. But why would he be doing a trick? What would Noctis have to achieve by doing this? Sonny couldn't think of anything. Unless, of course, unless this had been his plan all along. A cold, sickening feeling suddenly grasped Sonny's heart. High above him, the gaze of the dreadful Colossus slowly shifted from the elegant figure of the sorcerer to the four-armed devil standing by his side. The weight of that gaze pressed down on Sonny, making him bare his teeth in a snarl. It felt as if he was being pierced by it, his very soul laid bare. And somewhere, within that soul, locked inside the covetous coffer, were the three knives. One made of obsidian, one made of glass, one made of blood-red ruby. Something changed about the terrifying presence of the Sun Prince, and his deafening voice resounded once again, now suffused by a distant pale echo of vague emotion.
Shadow.
Sonny paled. He had forgotten that the master of the original Shadow Spawn was to blame for what happened to the Prince of the Ivory City as well. In fact, one could even say that Shadow Lord was the main culprit to blame for the hundreds of years of harrowing torture that Sun Prince had endured. He was the one who had stolen the Ember Knife, after all. So, if the Steel Colossus had a reason to really hate someone...
Curses.
Feeling his hearts turn cold, Sonny silently watched as the Colossus shifted his weight, then bent slightly, preparing to reach down with his giant steel hand. He was desperately trying to calculate his chances of escaping this situation alive. Ahem. At that moment, Noctis suddenly cleared his throat and then addressed Sun Prince in a friendly tone. Oh, but do be careful. You know how tricky shadows are, my friend. This one in particular is full of treachery, vileness, and unspeakable malice. The beast even slaughtered a temple full of innocent maidens. He also tried to poison me. Oh, the villainy! So be careful when you grab him, or you just might lose your hand. A low growl escaped from Sonny's mouth. He could feel the other members of the cohort grow tense and ready to fight. Cassia's hand fell on the hilt of the quiet dancer, and Kai outstretched his own arm, ready to summon his bow. Effie was staring up with a somber expression on her childish face, her body drawn like a spring. But what were they supposed to do? Even if Sonny knew which one of the three knives was meant for Sun Prince, how could he thrust it into the Transcendent's flesh? The actual body of the Chain Lord was buried somewhere inside the walking mountain of steel. More than that, using a knife would only make him mortal. After that, he would still have to be killed somehow. And killing a saint was no easy task. As the Colossus leaned down and moved his hand to reach inside the moondial, Sonny was thinking feverishly. He saw only one option: to run away as fast as he could. Using Shadow Step, he would be able to dodge at least. But for how long would he be able to outrun the giant? Sonny had seen him breach the gap between two islands with one jump. Now that the range of shadow control had grown, Sonny could possibly do the same. The difference was that a single jump like that was going to drain all his essence, while Sun Prince would be able to pursue him indefinitely, tireless and inescapable, like death itself. Damn, Damn. The world suddenly grew darker, the sun obstructed by a giant palm. It was open, descending from above like a vast plain of gray steel. It was as though the sky itself was falling on his head. Effie took a step back and hissed, "Sonny, what do we do?" Frozen in place, he hesitated for a moment and then said, "Nothing. Don't do anything. Don't move." There was no point in trying to fight the Sun Prince or even running away, because as the steel colossus leaned over the outer ring of the ancient moon dial, the tall pillars shone with ethereal light, suddenly flooded with a mind-boggling amount of soul essence. A myriad of runes revealed themselves, carved in a vast circle that encompassed the whole structure. And then, everything around them turned to light. Cold, pale light of the moon. Blinded by it, Sonny didn't see what happened next, and just felt something vast and chilling, yet intangible, move past him with stunning speed. Then, he heard the thunder of a deafening impact and the groan of steel that was being torn apart. The whole island shook, the quake throwing him to the ground. Sonny hit the cold stones and sensed the shadow of Sun Prince, changing. As the pale moonlight dimmed and was extinguished, he saw a shocking sight. The moon dial lay broken, the pillars shattered and toppled over. Not too far away from him, a giant steel hand rested on the ground. However, it was not attached to the body of the Colossus anymore. The steel giant was staggering back, his right arm torn right at the shoulder. A river of molten metal was flowing from the terrible wound, falling down like blood. The grass was turning to ash where it fell, and amidst all of this, unperturbed, stood Noctis. The sorcerer's expression was calm and slightly amused. Staring at all the chaos, he flicked a speck of dust off his silk garments, shook his head, and said, "Duh, have I not warned him to be careful? I did, didn't I? By the moon, why does no one listen to me? I am the wisest man in all of the Kingdom of Hope, after all." The Colossus staggered back, swayed, and then moved his foot to balance himself. The island quaked once more, and the giant grew still, bent slightly, and grasped at the gaping wound with his one remaining hand. His head turned, staring at Noctis with the same empty, unmoving expression. However, his polished steel eyes, which had been burning with the blinding reflections of the sun, became submerged in deep shadow. For a moment, there was silence. Sonny gritted his teeth, then slowly exhaled and raised a hand to wipe the sweat off his brow. After the initial panic from seemingly being sold out by Noctis, he had forced himself to calm down and think. It was then that Sonny realized that they were not in real danger, and told his friends to stand down. The immortal sorcerer was many things, including a liar and a cheat. Sonny did not doubt that Noctis had lied to him on many occasions about many things, sometimes for a specific purpose, and sometimes simply for the fun of it. However, one thing that Noctis was not was a fool. Sonny could imagine many situations in which the immortal would betray and damn him to death, but not without a good reason. And surrendering the cohort to Sun Prince was the opposite of what Noctis wanted to achieve. At best, it would have bought him some time at the expense of losing the 3 knives to the other chain lords. One thing that Sonny did not doubt was the sincerity of the sorcerer's desire to free Hope, and so he now understood that the immortal's sudden betrayal was just another deception. It had not been hard to guess what the purpose of the deception was as well. After all, Sunny had already guessed how the fateful meeting between rebellious Noctis and the Herald of the Chain Lords was going to end, and how the Iron Hand Island would get its name. Sun Prince had walked right into the sorcerer's trap, and Sunny had been used as bait. Not for the first time, and probably not for the last. So he wasn't very shocked by the sight of the giant's missing arm and of the streams of molten steel that flowed out of it, slowly cooling on the broken stones. Or at least, he wasn't supposed to be. In reality, the scene in front of him was so striking, so tremendous, that it was simply impossible to remain untouched by the vast scale of it. Still, he turned to Noctis, remained silent for a moment, and then let out a low growl.
You could have warned me, you know.
The sorcerer looked at him with sincere confusion. Then he smiled and said, "But what if I changed my mind at the last moment? Then warning you would have made me a liar. I have a reputation to uphold, don't I?" With that, Noctis winked at him, then turned to face the motionless Colossus. As Sunny stared at him darkly, the smile slowly disappeared from the sorcerer's face, making way for something cold and frightening. His gray eyes shone with distant moonlight, and in that moonlight, there was madness. Taking a step forward, Noctis suddenly appeared to be taller than he had been, his previously contained presence spreading over the world like a flood. Sunny shivered, feeling like prey being stalked by a hungry predator. The air suddenly seemed to smell of blood. The light of the sun appeared slightly dimmer, and in the echoing silence, they could almost hear the howls of countless beasts. Even though Sunny knew and somewhat trusted Noctis, he couldn't help but feel scared, and he wasn't even the focus of the immortal's furious gaze. Instead, it was aimed at the hunched Colossus. The sorcerer grinned, revealing his canines, and spoke, his clear voice flowing across the island like a river of blood. "Surrender the knives? Ah, I don't think so, my old friend. If I do, how will I kill you and your vile brother?" He laughed, and then took another step forward, raising his hand. A toppled pillar that blocked his path suddenly exploded into a rain of shards and dust, obliterated in a split second. "And that is what I intend to do. You, Severus, Solvain. I'll kill you all and break the chains that bind the demon of desire and set her free." Noctis took another step and then stopped, staring at Sun Prince with ruthless determination. "So, if you want to take the knives, you'll have to take them off my cold corpse. Oh wait, you can't. I'm immortal." He threw his head back and laughed again. This time, the sorcerer's laughter did not seem carefree and infectious. Instead, it was chilling and full of madness. The steel colossus looked at him from above, unmoving. His face was motionless and unexpressive, like that of a statue. However, it seemed as though the shadows veiling his eyes grew even deeper. Noctis shook his head and then said with disdain, "Oh, but you can try, of course. Go back. Go back and return with the Sun Legion, with the Dragon Severax, with the warriors of the Red Colosseum, with Solvain. You know where to find me. And I'll be waiting to welcome you." The giant continued to stare at him for a while, the molten steel flowing between his fingers. Sunny held his breath, not knowing what was going to happen next. Then, Sun Prince straightened, turned around, and walked away, making the island shake with each step. He reached the edge of it, stepped down on the heavenly chain, and continued walking, somehow keeping perfect balance. The chain was colossal in its own right, and yet the giant made it seem like a thin rope being traversed by a rope walker. Soon, he reached the neighboring island, climbed on it, and disappeared from sight. Only the rattling of chains and the tremors running through the ground from time to time reminded them of his visit. Well, that and the giant hand laying not too far away from them. Sonny studied it for a while, then walked over to Noctis and asked, his voice low and cautious,
Not to complain, but why let him go? Wouldn't it be easier to kill him right here and now? We won't get another chance to catch him alone, most likely, and judging by how easily you took his arm off.
Noctis did not respond immediately. Instead, he slowly turned his head, looked at Sonny coldly, and then gracelessly fell to the ground, his face pale, his chest rising and falling wildly, and his breath hoarse and labored. The sorcerer cursed, looking as if he was about to vomit.
Easily? Are you insane? I am at my weakest during the day, remember? And that strike. Gods, I spent several centuries infusing this shrine with moonlight. Do you think there's another one just laying around nearby? Just be happy he believed my bluff. Otherwise, things might have turned out really ugly really fast for us.
Sonny stared at the sorcerer with wide eyes for several long moments, then shook his head and sighed.
Lunatic. You damned lunatic. By the moon, I take it back. You are a fool.
It was only later when they returned to the flying ship and looked down upon the devastation that the short and furious clash between Noctis and the Sun Prince had created, that the full picture of what had happened finally settled in their minds. There was no going back now. The War of Immortals had truly begun. Soon, the whole of the Kingdom of Hope was going to be turned into a battlefield and drowned in blood by its frenzy. And then, the repercussions of that madness were going to spread outward like a tidal wave, changing the world forever. Looking down, Sonny couldn't help but shiver. The broken pillars, the severed hand of a giant, the ash swirling in the air. This place, this event, this moment in time. Was that the spark that would eventually ignite another, much more terrifying war? A war between gods and daemons, one that would destroy them all and bring about the end of the world. The war to end all wars. He still suspected that it was the unchaining of the demon of desire that had set it in motion. Looking down, Sonny silently whispered,
But then came desire, and with it came direction.
Turning his head slightly, he looked at Noctis, the person who had started it all. The sorcerer seemed calm, and without a worry in the world. His beautiful face was pale with exhaustion. But other than that, he did not look too different from his usual self. Not at all like a person who had potentially ushered in the obliterating apocalypse. Did he not understand the consequences of his actions? Or did he understand them far better than Sonny ever could? With a sigh, Sonny threw one last glance down at the Iron Hand Island, now truly deserving of its name. Despite the fact that he had not done much, he felt exhausted too, and there was a lot he had to think about. On the way back, Sonny remembered the future, He had been to the Iron Hand Island many times, had seen the toppled pillars and the severed arm of a giant, and had even sketched and described them in detail for an exploration report. And now, he had witnessed how the island came to be in that state. Another event from the distant past had repeated itself inside the nightmare almost to a T. After the destruction of the Temple of the Chalice, Sunny had begun to form a theory that fate was like a current, always pulling things toward an inescapable conclusion. The details could be changed, but the result seemed to always be the same. The events that had transpired on Iron Hand Island only cemented that theory. By all accounts, the appearance of the cohort and Mordred should have drastically changed the flow of history in the Kingdom of Hope. They had accelerated the start of the war and even slain one of the Chain Lords. If not for them, Noctis would have likely spent several years searching for a way to make a deal with Weaver, and only then rebelled against the other immortals. Those several years were, perhaps, the countdown to the blossoming of the Nightmare Seed. If no Awakened appeared to challenge the nightmare by then, is it possible that the seed would have just bloomed? Was that the logic? Seeds blossomed when the conflict inside them resolved itself, and fate repeated unchanged? Before, Sunny had thought that the task of the challenge was to resolve a conflict that would have otherwise remained unresolved. But now, knowing what he knew about the Chained Islands and the Kingdom of Hope, he realized that he had been wrong. With or without his help, Noctis was always going to start a war. The Ivory Tower was always going to break free from its chains. The Temple of the Chalice was always going to be destroyed, and the Sun Prince was always going to lose his hand to the enchanted moon dial. Come to think of it, his first nightmare would have resolved itself without his intervention too, one way or another. The nameless temple slave would have probably died, and Aurora of the Nine would have survived. Or would they? In any case, there would have been an ending.
That doesn't really make sense.
So, what was the role of the challengers? If the conflict could resolve itself, why were they here? What did the spell want from them? To prove that they were equal to the heroes of the past? Do it better than them? Simply survive? The spell did not care what one did inside the nightmare and how they went about solving the conflict. The reward was going to be the same either way. The challenger would ascend to a new rank. They could receive a true name, or even, in extremely rare cases, gain an evolution of their aspect. But those things could be done outside a nightmare as well. The only thing the spell cared about was that the challenger survived until the end. But that was not entirely true. The spell would not give additional rewards or deny the survivor their ascension. However, it did care a little, at least enough to appraise the challenger's performance. The appraisal did not really matter outside of the first nightmare, where it was tied to the boon, but the spell still gave them out each time. Good, exceptional, remarkable, glorious, and so on. Was there a hint in there somewhere about what it wanted? If so, Sunny had apparently pleased the spell very much in his first trial. Sitting in the shade of the sacred tree, he sighed and looked into the distance with a solemn expression.
I hope it will be pleased with us again this time. I hope we survive.
Soon the flying ship returned to the sanctuary and descended to its usual position above the altar island. As they returned to the ground, Sunny could see hundreds of faces turned to them, fear and uncertainty written in their lines. The inhabitants of the sanctuary had not seen the clash between Noctis and Sun Prince, but they all knew that something was wrong. By now, the island had stopped trembling, but their hearts had not. Without paying them any attention, the sorcerer tiredly landed on the grass, then turned to Sunny and frowned slightly.
I am going to rest for a couple of days. Most of the Sun Legion, as well as the army of the Red Colosseum, are arrayed along the border between Solvain's territory and that of the Ivory City. It is going to take them at least 2 weeks to assemble together and march east. So, we will give them enough time to break the current formation, but not enough to build a new one. We attack in 7 days.
He hesitated for a few moments, and then suddenly smiled.
More mongers in the Sun Legion forgetting their hatred and fighting side by side. Truly, no one but me could have made it happen. Am I not the most talented diplomat in all of the Kingdom of Hope?
With that, Noctis laughed, turned around, and walked away. Sunny stared at his back for a few moments, then sighed and said quietly,
You are definitely not. But then again, maybe you are.
The next morning, Sunny woke up in a strange mood. Knowing that they were nearing the end of the nightmare, he had expected himself to be consumed by somber trepidation. But, surprisingly, Sunny felt fine. It was as though the scope of the approaching battle was simply too large to be evaluated, so his mind had not bothered with it at all. Instead, he had practical problems he needed to solve. Sunny still did not feel completely comfortable in his new body. He barely had any time to get accustomed to its size and weight, after all. The next several days were going to be crucial in that regard. His previous garments had been torn when he evolved, and so Sunny summoned the puppeteer's shroud to wrap itself around his towering body. Although not as powerful as his other suits of armor, the shroud was much more comfortable. It was a bit nostalgic to wear the light armor once again, but also a bit sad to see it relegated to serving as a bona fide training suit. Remembering how he had planned to slaughter countless dormant nightmare creatures while being invulnerable thanks to his new, incredible awakened armor of the 5th tier just a few years ago, Sunny smiled wistfully and walked out of his room. The sanctuary seemed different somehow. The ring of giant menhirs was the same, and so was the beautiful garden. However, the people living in the ancient shrine had changed. They were hurried and full of fear, moving with panicked speed and feverish determination. Sunny noticed a few familiar faces. The old woman he had seen on his first day here was standing alone, a lost look on her face. The young woman was carrying the frightened child in her hands and a heavy pack on her back. The kind man with a neatly trimmed beard was gritting his teeth, his hand resting on the worn hilt of his sword. He sighed and looked away. An immortal transcendent had started a war to free a daemon from a prison built by a god. But these little people were the ones who were going to suffer the most as a result. In fact, they had been the ones to suffer the most throughout all of this, from the destruction of the Kingdom of Hope, to the madness she had cursed this land with, to now. He had been one of the little people himself once. Now, he was a devil helping destroy their lives. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, then looked up at the sound of steps approaching him. He saw Effie and Kai, both wearing their armor and packs, as though ready to go on a long hunt. He raised his eyebrows.
Going somewhere?
The little girl glanced at her burned compatriot, and then shrugged. Kai, meanwhile, smiled. Even though Sunny could not see his face, he could tell by his eyes. He could also tell that the smile was tinted with sadness. The archer simply nodded.
Yes, we are leaving.
He hesitated for a moment, then added,
Not for long, of course. We will be back before the week is over. You see, the sanctuary, it was a shelter for those who wanted to find peace in this land of madness. But now that Noctis has started a war, and both the Sun Legion and the warmongers are marching to raze it to the ground, the shelter is no more.
Effie shook her head, then sighed.
The West belongs to the warring cults of War and Sun. The South is abandoned and overtaken by nightmare creatures. The North, well, you know. These poor fools have nowhere else to go. So, we are going to guide them to one of the great chains and help them cross to the other side and leave the Kingdom of Hope behind forever.
She scratched the back of her head, then said thoughtfully,
Actually, we are not even sure if the nightmare goes that far. Maybe there's nothing out there beyond the chained island. And yes, we know that these people are not even real. Still, we thought that we'd at least try. Cassia even went and convinced Noctis to lend her the ship to help transport them.
Sunny stared at her, surprised. The little girl raised her chin.
What? I know that it's stupid. People need to do stupid things sometimes, you know?
He slowly shook his head.
No, actually, I don't think that it's stupid at all. It's just, the three of you are going, so why didn't you invite me as well?
Effie grinned.
You have stuff to do. How are you going to get used to that lanky body of yours while babysitting a bunch of refugees? So don't be lazy and get that stone girlfriend of yours to beat you black and blue while we are gone. We have a date with 2 whole armies in a week's time, remember?
Sunny made a sour face, then looked away.
Believe me, I remember. I'm going to train hard.
Kai gripped his shoulder for a moment. Well, the top of one of his lower arms that were in reach anyway. And then the two walked away without saying anything else. There was no need to say goodbye. With them gone, Sunny suddenly felt a bit lost. Shaking his head, he threw stupid thoughts out of his head and walked to the center of the garden, intending to spend the rest of the day practicing with the cruel sight. Saint would have probably healed enough to be summoned too, so he had his work cut out for him. Finding a secluded spot near the clear lake, Sunny went through the intense set of steps and exercises that he had developed to condition his body for the shadow dance. Of course, that had been in his human body. The shadow spawn, meanwhile, was a very different beast. Or, rather, devil. Despite its size, the gaunt body of the devil was incredibly nimble and swift. It was also capable of bursts of monstrous explosive strength that would leave many people stunned. In addition, it was itself a weapon. With his talons, claws, fangs, and horns, Sunny was capable of delivering a lot of damage, even unarmed. He could even kill things with the spike at the end of his tail. After that initial practice session, he summoned Saint and started the real training. As they sparred, Sunny observed the departure of the inhabitants of the sanctuary. They left in a column, with Kai in the front and Effie walking behind. Some were carrying their meager belongings, while some were empty-handed. Some cried, while some remained silent and stoic. Some even smiled. Above them, the flying ship moved, carrying those who could not walk. Sunny could not see, but knew that Cassia was controlling it. For a moment, he was curious about how she was able to communicate with the sailor dolls. However, that short distraction cost him dearly when Saint delivered a painful blow to his abdomen. And so, Sunny decided to concentrate on himself. Turning his full attention back to the training fight, he thought,
I wish them well, even if they are not real. I wish them all the best.
Long hours passed in arduous training. Slowly but surely, he was growing accustomed to the new proportions of his strange and powerful body. His height, his reach, his might, all of it was starting to click, making him feel confident in his own skin once more. At some point, dead tired, Sonny decided to take a break, commanding Saint to stand down. He crouched near the lake and drew some water to wash the sweat off his face. Then he poured some on his head and sighed, looking at the clear surface of the lake. The graceful figure of Saint reflected on it, and near her, his own. Obsidian skin, bestial features, eyes that seemed like pools of liquid darkness, twisting horns. Master Jet had once joked that he would be a flower boy one day. Remembering it, Sonny smiled.
I wonder what she would have said if she saw me like this.
And then, he froze. His sweat turned cold. There was a third reflection on the surface of the lake. It was a tall and slender young man, with pale skin and raven black hair. His face was sharp and thin, not exactly handsome, but at the same time charming and strangely beautiful. His striking eyes didn't seem to possess a color of their own, and instead reflected the world back on itself like two pools of liquid silver. Currently, they were as blue as the boundless vast sky. The young man smiled pleasantly and then raised a hand in greeting. A painfully familiar voice suddenly resounded in Sonny's mind.
Ah, Sunless. How nice it is to meet you again after all this time. Just look at you. Goodness. I almost failed to recognize you behind that fearsome face.